systems nominal.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow mech enthusiasts and gearheads. Welcome to the show. Today we are talking to Mr. Nick Huisman, the line director at Heavy Gear over at DreamPod 9. First off, hello, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
No problem. And secondly, congratulations on already getting the initial funding for the fourth edition of the Heavy Gear role-playing game, which is currently kickstarting as we speak.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a ride to get it here. So glad to see it finally make funding goals. So
I have seen versions of the beta floating around the internet for quite some time. It's been like 15 years since the last edition of the Heavy Gear RPG, has it not?
Longer than that. I just looked before we came on here. The last player handbook came out in 2003.
Yeah, okay, that's something. All right. Where did I have?
It's been a little while.
Remember where I put my copy of? I got the my Heavy Gear first edition book somewhere around here. So,
I've got one.
Yeah, good, because you'd think I'd have it on me right here if I'm doing this interview, but anyway, I'm completely discombobulated.
I've got all the digital ones up here.
Yeah,
we actually just went through and that whole old library got redone.
Indeed, yeah, the revitalized digital printing, so to speak, of the earlier books. Those are still ongoing, as I understand it.
Well, they're in the process of rolling out. They are all done. Yeah. I've got all of them. They're sitting right there. So, all 60 something.
Yeah, the Heavy Gear license has had quite a run, quite a print run for all the different editions. That's for sure, damn sure.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the IP started in 1996 was the first RPG release.
Mm-hmm.
The first product was in 1994, actually.
Yeah, the Heavy Gear Fighter card game, as I recall.
Yep. So for those of you who aren't old enough, it came in a VHS case, which was about that big. You opened it like a book, and everything was in there.
That is classic 90s right there.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And then we had an RPG in 96. And if you've heard of Heavy Gear before and you're trying to place the name, you may be familiar with the two video games that came out by Activision.
Especially if they're watching this channel for a while, because I did videos on both of them.
There's also a TV show. We don't talk about the TV show.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it wasn't as good as the BattleTech TV show, and even that one, it gets laughed at in setting for being propaganda.
We Heavy Gear kind of does that too, where the in-universe justification for the TV show was bad reality show that the director ran off with the money for.
Oh, they'll do that. Let's face facts.
Yeah.
Well, before we continue on with the Heavy Gear itself, let's talk a little about yourself. How did you get involved with DreamPod 9 and become the line director for the entire Heavy Gear IP?
So it's a bit of a ride. It starts back in 1998 when a friend of mine, his name was Kyle, I would go over to his house. We lived like a mile away from him. And he had this video game called Heavy Gear, the original one.
Oh, yeah.
And we played that thing for I don't know how many hours, just forever. And then life moved on and I forgot it existed. That was until probably 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm sorry, 2011. Because there's a YouTube channel it was at the time called Beasts of War. They're now called On the Tabletop or something like that. And they were really big at the time for doing model previews where companies would send them miniatures, they would get them out, they'd review them, they would paint them, and they would build them. And I saw this video, I'm like, it says Heavy Gear on there. Wait a minute, I've heard that before.
That's familiar.
Yeah. So
haven't I stomped around in this robot before?
Yeah, it's like, wait a minute. I don't recognize any of this stuff because it was a new faction at the time. But that got me back into the idea that, this is a miniatures game. And I'd been playing miniatures at that point for close to 10 years. Going through the inevitable Warhammer,
I can see the collections behind you on the shelves there.
Yeah. Apologize for the mess. I actually didn't start with Warhammer. My first miniature game was actually the WizKids BattleTech game.
Ooh.
The old Tech.
During the World of Blake Jihad Dark Age period.
Mm-hmm. That's actually where I started, and then segued into Warhammer and all that. But this Heavy Gear has this Warhammer light game. And I tried to get into it, and at the time, the rules were, how do I put this nicely?
Opaque?
Dumpster fire?
Clusterfuck.
Yeah, pretty much. I wasn't sure if we could swear.
You can fucking swear.
Cool. Yeah, no, it sucked. I was flipping through it, and it was a cool system, but it had some weird convolutions to it. And it just went in the back of my head as, oh, this is cool. All right. And then in 2013, they did the Kickstarter for all plastic. So the company's range prior to that was metal with some resin. This was a Kickstarter to get starter product out in plastic, because plastic cuts the price by
it makes it far more available for someone who's
shitload.
just starting out, especially if you
Yeah.
can put out a nice big box with some pre-designed armies and stuff like that.
Yeah, so they went from, a starter army that'd be $200 to like 15 plastic minis for 50 or 60. Like, that's a pretty big
It's a
jump.
hell of a difference.
Hell of a difference. The plastics aren't quite as good as the metals in terms of miniature quality, but they're a quarter of the price.
Yeah, well, you get what you pay for. Let's face facts.
And also just it's easier to get into. But got in with that. Got the second edition. Okay. The Wargame side has had two different versions. So Heavy Gear is an RPG. And then the combat system for the RPG was spun off as a Wargame. And it's referred to as Heavy Gear Tactical by the fans. It was just called Heavy Gear at the time.
Yeah.
And it was like full-on milsim combat. Like, pretty aggressive.
Yeah, exactly my cup of tea.
Yeah. Great system. Eventually that was switched over to a new version called Heavy Gear Blitz, where they got, instead of the old system had a lot of like multiplication in it to do damage and all of that. It went to an addition-based system. It tweaked with the dice mechanics a little bit. And it was the second edition of that shipped with that first plastic Kickstarter. And I got the book, and I tried. I really tried. The editing job was just abysmal.
That's always been the problem with RPG and gaming products a lot of the time. These are technical manuals. They need to be treated as such, and editing and layout are top priorities, perhaps even more so. Well, no, the rules themselves have to be well designed and play tested and stuff, but your ability to explain what's happening and how to use the rules. There's a reason why so many RPGs barely get played, rules as written, is because they're written in such a way that you can't use the rules.
Or, you don't understand them, or there's conflicting rules in the book. Anyway, I gave that a shot, and this was a horribly written book. Then they do a second Kickstarter for more plastic minis and a third edition. This was 4 years later.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to give this one more shot. If it doesn't work out, I'm going to put it to bed, whatever. And this time they actually went out and they did a public beta for the third edition rules, where they were actually posting the full rules doc and going through the development process on it publicly. And I got a hold of it, and it was better, but better is a relative term. It was still really bad. And my day job is I'm actually a college professor. So I teach college.
Which subject?
Mechanical engineering.
Oh, well, that's handy.
Yes.
Same topic. You've got mech right in there, so it's perfect for it.
You were weirdly on topic for this kind of stuff. So when you're talking about technical manuals, I'm used to textbooks where we're teaching a very, very technical subject, but to people who have no idea what's going on. So I got this rule book, and I think it was 60 something pages when I got it. The edited version I sent back went up to 120 pages if you put all the commentary in there. I tore it a new asshole. And I'm like, one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to say, okay, thank you, life goes on. Or maybe, just maybe, they're going to say thank you and work some of it in. And I got it back. And
they're Canadians, so they're probably just going to say sorry.
Yeah. But
although,
no, they're like
French Canadians, so désolé tabarnak.
Yeah. So they got it back, and they went, and the guy went through like almost item by item and said, like this, don't like this, disagree with this, agree with this. Can you do that again? So that was how this whole thing started. I got involved with the editing side of the war game, which turned into game development of said war game. And then when the RPG project came up, they're like, hey, do you want to be on this thing and run the show? I'm like, okay.
Well, that's a great way of getting in your foot in the door. Plus, having someone with technical manual experience is damned important, because let's face it, the vast majority of people who do make RPGs don't have that. in most cases.
I have read so many RPGs that I just want to rip my hair out on the rules. Where it's like, I get what you're saying, but I don't get how you got there.
Yeah. Or the kind of thing where it's like style over substance, where it's like a lot of OSR people are gonna hate me for this, but I really don't like Morkborg, if you've ever heard of that one. It's
I know Morkborg.
Yeah, it's like, what is this? How am I supposed to use this? It looks interesting to look at, but there's barely a game in this. There's like, you know, a couple of rules and make everything up as you go along. Like, I'm paying for this, dumbass. I need some actual product for my money.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
And the other extreme is the second edition rule set, which is what the new edition's based on. So for those who are not familiar, we are kickstarting the 4th edition of the role-playing game.
Link will be in the description below.
Yep, it is already funded. I think the base pledge is like 30 Canadian dollars or something like that for an ebook. It goes to like 60 if you want the adventure modules, which I highly recommend, by the way. We've got a guy who's working on those. They're fantastic.
Yeah, confirming here, pledge $30 Canadian or more, HGRPG 4th edition basic ebook.
And if you want to, I can actually, there's even a canon character add-on. So if you want to make a character for the universe, you can do that.
Keep it tasteful, people.
No
Canopus cat girls.
I have veto power on all of it.
Good.
It is written in there that DreamPod 9, which means me, has veto power on all of it.
Yeah. This is anime, but it's not that anime.
Yeah. Yeah. So what the project was, though, is 4th edition. And obviously that implies there was a 3rd edition. The 3rd
Which
edition
I noticed wasn't really mentioned during the Kickstarter. I say it's compatible with 1st and 2nd.
Yeah.
There's no mention of Silcore.
Because 3rd edition represented a very significant change in the way the game was done. It changed to a D20 system. And the reception was questionable. Long story short, when we started this project, the boss told me use 2nd edition as your base. But even as we just went around fishing for people to talk to, all of them are like, we hate 3rd edition, we hate 3rd edition, we hate 3rd edition. So we started with 2nd edition, and 2nd edition is a beautiful game. It's 25 years old. It needed some attention. It needed some work in a few areas. So that's where we started.
Well,
and that was 2.5 years ago. 2.5 years. It was like about to say that was 2.5 years ago.
That's how much of that was just design and playtest and stuff versus just the basics?
We have had a playtestable version for probably. We had a playtest version within 9 months, because at its core, the edition we've got, if you've played 2nd edition Heavy Gear, I'm not going to say this is 2nd edition returned, but you can tell that 2nd edition is in this thing's DNA. We've called it the grandchild of second edition.
Yeah, I'm looking at basically the description here that I'm seeing on the website for the Kickstarter here, and there have definitely been some changes, especially on the character creation, and many of the mechanics have been altered in other ways.
They've been altered, but if you look at them and having played 2nd edition, they're not that much of a jump when you actually get in there.
I don't know. You're missing a whole bunch of attributes. That's one thing that I know.
So that is a thing that has come up a few times, because people are like, where'd the attributes go? And so we had a conversation fairly early on. For those of you who are not familiar, so Dungeons and Dragons, everybody knows Dungeons and Dragons. 6 attributes, 18 skills. Okay, that's the entire game. Heavy Gear had 15 attributes and 75 skills.
Yeah, perfectly normal.
It's a lot of information. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. The problem we had wasn't that that system was an issue. It was more the presentation, because what we posed to a few people was, okay, here's a stat block. And what we asked them to do was to say, okay, now imagine you're sitting at a bar with this person. What is it like talking to them? 15 attributes doesn't really convey that information. And if you were to go back and look at some of the older adventures, I've actually got one sitting up right here. One of the earliest adventures Heavy Gear published was called Operation Jungle Drums.
That's a classic one.
It is. And there's a character in there by the name of Miranda Petit, who pops up a few times in later fiction. It takes, her stat block is maybe, that big. Attributes and like 20-ish skills. Okay, cool. It then takes 2 pages to explain who she is, what she does, who does she know, what's going on, all of that other information. But you kind of need that to role play the character.
Okay.
Like that's information that you need. So when we went into the new edition, we're like, okay, how can we merge those? How can we reduce this down so you know in less space and in a more concise manner what you need to know to actually play with her? And one of the things was attributes. What we did is we replaced the attributes with a couple of systems. And the big one is we call them attributes, quirks, and adversities. And these were the starting point of our replacement for the old numbered attributes. They're not the end point. And essentially what we did is we took the attributes and replaced the non-zero ones with a narrative statement. So instead of Miranda having an agility of 3, we assigned a narrative aspect to that. Like what does it mean that she's agile? In her case, she's a very small, petite gymnast. That can convey that same information as agility 3. Then we took that and associated a dice mechanic with that to mimic the old system where it used to be you would roll a skill test, add your relevant attribute to it, and that was the dice you rolled. It still does that. It's just now doing it with narrative words and not a number.
Okay, so how would one decide which narrative word would apply in this case then?
So that's where the attributes, quirks, and adversities. There's 3 of them or 4. There's 3 types you get 4. They've evolved more to be like mental personality things. Adversities are personality traits you can invoke for a bonus d6 on a roll. So in the case of Miranda, we did a character sheet for her with the new edition. If you read her storyline, she's very mission focused, so much so that she's kind of actively oblivious to the things around her that aren't related to it.
Yeah, I can see that on the sample character sheet here.
Yeah.
So
when you are role playing, when you are describing to the DM what you are doing as Miranda, if you can leverage the fact that you're mission focused, you will gain a bonus die on that attempt.
Okay.
In the case of adversities, it goes the other way. Those are penalties. And then quirks can go either for a bonus or for a negative. Each one is 1 use, and you have to use negative ones to get them back. So you can't just, I'm only going to use the good things and never the bad things. You're going to be using a mix of both. So you're encouraged to play the character according to their storyline, according to how they are presented, but that's also conferring dice effects to you. And then we have the extra layer on that of what are called perks and flaws, which is a second system on there. These are passive effects that would have also done things that those attributes did. So in the case of Miranda, we gave her an attribute called Agile level 2. That means that she wins ties whenever you're doing a skill test, if it's related to the fact that she's a gymnast. Like in universe, she's actually a gymnast.
Yeah.
So it lets her win ties on that and confers other effects around it. So we still have that information there. It's not just providing a dice bonus, it can provide another bonus now. But it's being presented in a narrative storytelling manner so that when you and the GM are playing, you're not consulting a number and trying to interpret what this number means on the fly.
Okay, so it's more, the game has gone from prior editions, the first and second edition, which are far more simulation of the rules as simulation of the world's physics, whereas here, a large portion of that has shifted more to a more narrative focus involving, more like proceduring on the story and role playing. Is that correct to say?
We still do all that world physics sim stuff.
Okay.
That's all still there. It's just there's a narrative layer on top of it that will adjust how your character plays it out.
Okay. So in that case, then, which parts then continue that hardcore sim aspect? Because admittedly, that is what first got me into Heavy Gear as an RPG and stuff like that personally.
So if you go back to old second edition, the actual role-playing rules are pretty much you make a skill test versus a target number, pass, fail. That's the RPG side. That's still how that plays out now. We've made 2 changes to it. Number 1, that 75 skill list got bigger, weirdly. What we did, though, is we grouped skills together in what are called domains. So a skill domain is what you would think of a skill in another role-playing game. So athletics is a skill domain, and it's your physical ability associated with something. Whenever you have a skill, though, you pick a specialization. What is causing that? So in the case of Miranda, if you look at her character sheet, she is athletics is her skill domain, and she has a acrobatic skill because she is an acrobat gymnast. There's another one above it, gunnery, which is how accurate you are with ranged attacks. Hers is heavy gear specifically. And the argument here is, cool, you know how to shoot the giant robots' guns. Go fire an RPG now. Those are two dramatically different skill sets.
Indeed. Someone who's been in the Army, I could tell you, there's a very different thing between a Carl Gustav and an assault rifle.
Very much so. Now, there is at least some conceptual overlap there. So one thing we let you do with the game is whenever you're called upon to take a skill test, you're the one who basically, again, using narrative, what skill are you using? You need to use something within the domain of what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to shoot something, you better be using a skill to shoot something. But if you have something that isn't exactly on point, you can still use that at a penalty.
Yeah.
So it's the argument here that, okay, you were in the Army, you may know how to fire your basic stock issue rifle. Even if you're not trained on the Gustav, it's still a weapon.
And you still know which way to point it.
Exactly. So you're able to use skills outside of their exact application at a penalty.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And then, so that combined with the attributes, combined with the perks, that's that role-playing side that the older edition had. Now, where the old edition got really, really crunchy was equipment and vehicles.
Good.
We have a bigger vehicle list. We have a more detailed combat system. I lost track of how many pages we have in equipment. I know that the 2 equipment chapters, we had to break it into 2, one for weapons and armor, one for everything else. Those are still the 2 biggest chapters in the book.
Well, yeah, I mean,
we kind of went off the deep end.
Well, I mean, the thing about heavy gear or BattleTech or any kind of game like this, sci-fi games, whether it's Cyberpunk 2020, Travel, or anything like that, the gear is one of the reasons why you're playing the game in the first place. You want to have that crunch. I mean, the crunch is why you're playing.
So we've got over 600 different vehicles.
Nice.
So it's just gone complete insanity. But the combat system has been shifted to look a little bit more like the modern war game. It still plays out in a very similar manner. What you do is whenever you take a turn, you're going to declare how your character is moving. You're going to be able to perform actions, and you can do basically anything you want within the scope of that. We give you a bunch of information around, like, okay, your gear has a little radar mini map, and it can see things around it. How does that work? All of that information's in there, which even the older system kind of lacked that in a few places. But
there were the technical manuals that were released with each edition that did cover a bit more of like how the technology works, but those were a separate book altogether.
Yeah, we're just in a core book right now. Like that. That's all. That's it. It's just a core book right now. But yeah, you've got a war game level combat system on the RPG. So you still got that.
Yeah.
You still got that.
Well, that's actually something that the Heavy Gears role-play game / war game actually did better than BattleTech. Even I would say arguably. They're the MechWarrior RPG. This baby right here. Ironically, I have it nearby somewhere. Oh shit, right over there. Anyway, that one was more layered on to the actual BattleTech the war game, and not necessarily always in the most elegant of ways. Whereas here with Heavy Gear, that has always been one of its claims to fame, is that the war game aspect and the role-playing game aspect were very well meshed together. That was, that you could go from one to the other just like that easily.
And that is still true. Yeah. So what we did is we were told with the new edition to guide off of the current war game rules. And the current war game rules actually adapt to an RPG very well. There was just like action economy structuring around it that we had to deal with. So if you play the RPG, you're not going to know how to play the war game. That's the same system. The thing is, though, we already had this established, rather detailed RPG system. So we got to merge both of those together.
Oh, well, it's always good. There are a couple of games that do this kind of thing, like, Adventure Conqueror King does that with its Domains at War, war game system, where the basic idea is that if you were to take the war game and play it out at the table using the regular RPG rules, just doing each character one at a time and so like that, you get the same results in both cases. And I think that's the same thing can apply here for the heavy gear systems. True, yes?
It does. It does. There's only one real difference. The war game normalizes the amount of dice you roll and it keeps it much more constrained. They kind of assume every pilot's on the same skill level, whereas in the RPG you can have different pilots on different skill levels. The way it works is whenever you're called upon to say shoot something, you use your gunnery skill. The skill number is how many dice you roll, and then you add 1.
Okay.
So if your skill rating is a 4, you'll roll 5 dice to attack.
Okay. So that keeps things on a more reasonable basis dice-wise, so you're not just, chucking Shadowrun levels of dice all over the place.
Yeah. Like the highest we've ever gotten somebody in the RPG was 9 dice in one roll.
Okay, so not Shadowrun levels.
No. But the war game only starts every character off at 2. So that equivalent character in the RPG would start at 4. That's the only real difference. Yeah. And then the war game kind of glosses over some of the mechanics that the RPG digs into. Like in the RPG, you have to track your ammunition, and you have to reload your gun.
Yeah,
the war game doesn't worry about that's fine. The
war
war
game it's on a different time scales. Doesn't take into account those smaller little moments. Although I imagine things like logistics and supply lines will kind of be important for a war game too.
They are if you're gonna play it in campaign play, but just a pick up and play game, you don't have to worry about the fact that you chose this gear that there's maybe 200 of on the planet, and you've got 3 of them somehow.
Yeah,
the game doesn't always worry about that. It just kind of lets you play whatever you want.
Any kind of war game that you're playing on a one mission, just an instant action style. Okay, that's never going to be a thing. But campaign play is ultimately like if you want to do proper war gaming, that is the epitome of what you're looking for. So those kinds of things, at least for the kind of crowd that I run with, those are the kind of things they're looking at in terms of like any kind of RPG or war game.
Yeah, the RPG handles that. So you've got ammo counting on every weapon. So you've got you have your autocannon, which is your basic gear-sized assault rifle. It's got 6 shots. Well, 6 attacks. Let me rephrase that.
6 bursts
six bursts before you're gonna have to reload it, and then you can just swap the mag out and you're good to go. Stuff like rocket launchers and all that. It might have 4 salvos of rockets in it, and your vehicle can't shove rockets up there.
That has always been something. When I was playing the heavy gear, the first heavy gear game on PC, that was something that I liked. That I almost wish you could have extra reloads in those games, that you could just like reload your autocannons and stuff like that in the first and second one.
Yeah.
Instead in the second one, there was that thing where you could just adjust the amount of ammunition, and that was the one thing that I didn't like about that one in comparison.
Yeah, I think that what they had is you never had to reload the magazine. Like you always just like, I have a magazine with 150 shots in it. No, you don't. That's not how that works. My favorite one is a gun. There's a gun called a snub cannon.
Oh yeah,
and it's it is a short-ranged anti-tank fuck you gun. If you go to the original RPG, the guys that carried it would have like 3 spare rounds to fire it with. So they're carrying around like 4 shots on this giant anti-tank gun. Yeah, like the war game doesn't worry about that. The RPG 100% does, where it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to reload that every single time,
and you're gonna have to pay for that ammunition, and that shit isn't cheap.
Yeah, like you don't have to worry about that ammo. You have to repair your vehicle. You have to perform maintenance on it. Like
thermobaric ammunition is not gonna grow on trees, young man.
It doesn't grow. Ammo doesn't grow on trees. Spare parts don't grow on trees. Do you have any idea how much time it takes to maintain some military vehicles?
I do.
Yes.
It takes a while.
Yeah.
And that's not even going into the ATVs and the IFVs. I mean,
every single vehicle in heavy gear is subject to maintenance rules. And we're a little generous because we understand this is a game. So we're only probably putting in about half the maintenance you would actually need. But it's still enough to make you notice it.
Yeah. Well, it also makes you hopefully have a team of technicians following you around, so you don't have to do it all yourself.
Yeah, so it's actually one thing the game
that is something that I was going to bring up. Yeah, the rules for your sponsor teams and sponsors and such.
Yeah. So what we did is there's so many gears, there's so many vehicles. We had a very fun question initially when we were starting to do the new edition. We had somebody ask, because we were playing, we were running through a second edition campaign because it'd been a while since a few of us had. And we had a couple of new people on as well who were joining us to participate because we wanted to get their opinion, their feedback. And one guy asked a fantastic question that none of us could answer. He's reading the second edition rulebook and says, okay, I've built my character. How do I get a gear? The rules don't actually tell you. Like, they just kind of assume that you get one, and they don't really deal with the rest of it. Well, we wanted to make sure that that was a lot more clear. So when you do your character creation, you actually create your characters as a group under what's called a team. And that team has a sponsor, and that is one of the major powers on the planet that will fund you, that will provide you with the ammunition, that will provide you with the logistics, and will give you access to equipment initially. It's kind of a reputation system almost. As you do things for factions, they will bump up your reputation level with them.
Nice.
And they will give you access to more stuff. So you start off at level 1. We call it a priority level. Priority 1.
Combat priority, like in the first Heavy Gear video game, actually.
Actually, it is. Yeah, it's that. You start at 1 with your primary sponsor, and you're 0s with everybody else. And then as you complete missions, you can bump your priority level up with your main sponsor. You may piss off somebody else. You may gain priority with another sponsor.
Yeah.
You can go work for anybody if you want to. So whenever you visit your sponsor's facilities, they'll top you off on ammo, fuel. If you want new vehicles, they can hook you up. So it encourages you to kind of work with them and cultivate those relationships.
Yeah. I'm assuming if your relationship with a particular faction goes in the negatives, they're not going to be refueling you so much as, well, they will be giving you more ammunition at gunpoint.
Probably, yeah. Yeah,
nice.
The system goes to a minimum of 0. At a 0, they're not going to provide you with anything, and then you might actively be hostile with them.
Yeah.
So,
well, one could imagine. I mean, you keep going on missions against them, they're probably not going to be feeling particularly generous unless that's one of those live and let lives megacorps.
And you're not going to really have an opportunity to go make it up to them either, because they're not going to let you. This isn't a video game where you can go, it's like, oh no, I pissed somebody off, here's a bribe. They're probably going to keep shooting.
That works on a very limited subset of people for the most part.
That might work on the local base commander. That is not going to work at a national level.
No.
And we've also expanded it as time has gone on. Those sponsors also give you access to some bonus abilities. So if you pick, there's a faction in the universe called the Black Talons.
One of my favorites.
They're kind of elite special forces. And in the lore, and if you've played the second video game, you'll have seen they have what are called the Dark Series gears, where you can take a normal gear and make it a dark version.
Yeah, modified for increased stealth capability and sensor package.
Yeah. You can do that if you're a Black Talon team in the new RPG. You can do it to any gear and any strider on the planet. So the Black Talons normally have a list of things this big that they can do that to. Now it's like that big. It's anything in the arsenal.
Oof,
so
the CEF never knew what hit them.
Yeah, so it's like, oh no, you've got a dark, insert thing that the Black Talons have never had before. It lets you do that. That's the cool thing for playing that. The CEF we did kind of interesting because we are focused solely on Terra Nova right now. So all of the CEF, Utopia, Caprice, and Eden characters are kind of all there for the same reason.
Yeah.
So you don't actually do them individually. They're collectively referred to as the Invaders as a sponsor. So when you play them, you get to pick any of the 4, and your character is that, and you get access to that character, that planet's equipment. So
and there's quite a bit of variety with regards to all those different planets, because you got the actual Earth, the Colonial Expeditionary Force, and all the different forces from the colonies, from Caprice, from Eden, as you mentioned, Utopia.
So that's what you've got right now. There's going to be more, because the plan is core book, which is Terra Nova. We're already in drafting process for the first expansion book, which will introduce a totally new colony that's never appeared before in any fiction. Well, it's in the fiction. We're not adding anything new.
Yeah, there's a couple of planets that never really got explored. New Jerusalem,
we're doing
Jotunheim, and Botany.
that one.
Jotunheim?
No, New Jerusalem.
New Jerusalem. Okay, that should
Yeah.
be interesting.
We were holding off to talk about it, and then I'm at Adepticon, and Robert's like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do," and then like the storyline of New Jerusalem, and I'm like, "Dude, Robert, we were supposed to wait." Robert's the company owner, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm like, "We're supposed to wait till after the Kickstarter to talk about this. Now you already blew it, damn it."
Well,
So
you know,
yeah, we're doing New Jerusalem next,
excellent.
and seeing how they show.
I'm assuming you can't tell me get any hints about what that implies, other than the fact that, well, it's
They're
New
not.
Jerusalem, so we're probably going to have some cross-shaped mechas.
They're not allied with the CEF.
Well, considering every ship, the fleet that the CF sent there has never come back, I kind of guessed as much.
And the second relief fleet they sent also didn't come back. I was talking to Discord with somebody. If you've ever seen a movie where it's like, a bunch of assailants go into a room with their target, the door closes, and then it just flips over to the view on the outside of somebody on the outside watching, and then you just hear like the screams inside. The door opens and the target walks out, and all the assailants are dead. That's kind of what's going on there.
Oh boy, the
Like
Black Talons are going to want to meet these people real bad.
You might strike a deal with the devil if you do.
Oh dear. Oh, that should be interesting. Plus, I'm imagining that in spite of the invasion, the local factions on Terra Nova probably don't get along quite as well as they probably should in the face of that.
No, that's been an issue that they've had. So narratively, the last book that was published for Heavy Gear that advanced the timeline was 2011, I believe, and that set the year as 1951.
Terra Nova.
That's a Terra Nova time, so that's like 61, 52-ish. For those who've seen the first video game takes place in 1936. The second video game takes place in 1941.
Yeah.
Each year is actually only about 7/10 of one of our years. So 1936 to 1954 is about 18 Terra Novan years. That's like 13 or 12 years Earth time.
This has always been something that I've loved about DreamPod 9 settings in general. This one, also Jovian Chronicles, Gear Creek, and all these other ones. Especially they're really the sci-fi ones. It's really one of the few proper hard SF game RPG companies out there. DreamPod 9. All these settings they may have an anime aesthetic, but these are hardcore realistic science fiction universes that take themselves fairly seriously, which is something I always appreciate from these.
I once heard a fan describe Heavy Gear as Tom Clancy meets Gundam.
Yes, well, I think that'd probably be more Jovian Chronicles. This is more Tom Clancy meets Votoms, let's face it.
Tom Clancy meets Votoms is if you know what Votoms is reference, that's the better one, but not everybody knows what Votoms is.
I recently picked up the Blu-ray for the entire series, so I've been going through that.
It's a good one.
It's a good one. I mean, before that, I'd watched Fang of the Sun Dougram from start to finish. So
Dougram's a good one too.
I mean, yeah, what Votoms is to Heavy Gear, that one is to BattleTech. I mean, they literally ripped out. They literally
it is a griffin.
Acquired some of the mechs from that back in the day.
The Dougram is a griffin.
The Dougram, well, no, the Dougram is a Shadow Hawk.
It's a Shadow
Hawk.
I'm sorry,
is a griffin.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know these things.
And
I think the Zeus is an Ironfoot.
Yeah, I could believe that.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those. But I mean, if you're going to, acquire a couple of designs, that's some good ones to acquire. Let's face it. Plus, it's a damn good anime.
Yeah, and I'm going back to your point on the hard sci-fi thing. Yeah, Heavy Gear accounts for the fact that not every planet has the same length of day.
Yeah,
or has the same length of year.
The same gravity, the same conditions, atmosphere,
same gravity,
everything.
Same conditions, flora and fauna.
Yeah,
and it's like I'm going to knock on BattleTech a little bit here. I'm a BattleTech fan. It's fine. Every single planet uses the exact same Earth calendar. Over 1,000 worlds in BattleTech, and they all use the exact same calendar. What?
It reminds me of back in the day before the Julius Caesar instituted the Julian calendar. They had like their harvest in January because the calendar was so out of whack.
Yeah.
There's probably some planets that are really like, okay, screw this. We're joining the periphery nations. Done with daylight savings time.
I hate daylight savings time. But yeah, that's a thing where it's like Terra Nova as a planet is a little bit smaller than Earth. It's more dense, so you end up with a comparable but slightly higher gravity there.
Yeah, and
It's
the EM fields are particularly weird, which allows for
Mhm.
land ships.
Yeah, you actually get like floating aircraft carriers.
Yeah, I noticed that at one point wasn't there going to be a line of miniatures for the land ships,
So
land ship
you
game?
actually can buy them. They are available through the company. It was for a larger scale. If you're familiar with like an Epic 40K or something like that
Mhm.
style, we are looking at options to bring that back as a system, but initially we did try a Kickstarter that didn't generate enough interest.
Mhm.
It's all there though, but yeah, you can buy a mini of the aircraft carrier from the first video game.
Nice.
Mhm.
I also noticed, like on the Drupal 9 community blog, they actually provide stats for Senior Ranger Edward Scott, not just
You're welcome. I
yeah,
wrote those.
thank you, and also the
Um,
main character from the second book.
yeah,
This,
yeah.
this bad boy right
Um,
here.
yeah, we actually got to do him as well, and we shot them forward to the current timeline
I
too.
know. This is something that
F-
Heavy Gear's been the difference, another difference between Heavy Gear and BattleTech. You guys actually inserted your video games into the canon as opposed to kind of treating
oh
them as
yeah,
like,
yeah, no, that all happened.
yeah.
It's actually funny if you go look at the Kickstarter page. There is a art piece called "The Angel of Sorrento."
Mhm.
There's a guy sitting with a 1,000-yard stare next to a bed of a wounded pilot. Zoom in on his name tag if you can see it.
Let me see here.
I have the high res one too. If you can see it. I don't know if it shows up super well. I had to save that in a
It
low
doesn't
res.
show up super well. I'm looking at it,
That's
but
Edward Scott. That's Edward Scott.
there we go. Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought I recognized that buzz cut.
yeah. If you see the high res version, which is what will be in the rule book,
Yeah,
that is Edward Scott.
nice.
Like that is actually him, and he's actually that piece corresponds to a short story,
Mhm.
and that he's in the short story. So there's a short
Nice.
story on one page, and then that picture is right next to it.
Excellent. I mean,
Um,
I remember playing that. I thought, honestly, of all the 90s FMVs I've ever seen, those ones for Heavy Gear were actually very good.
they're weirdly decent. Yeah,
Yeah,
like the
they're like,
sets.
yeah, the two, like, the younger actors are kind of like, iffy in
Yeah, it's
terms of their
okay.
acting, but everybody else is really good.
Yeah, they actually do a decent job.
Mm.
The guy who played Edward Scott would go on and is in other films and all of that.
Yeah.
The um the sets were really well designed for that. Like there was investment and money in that.
Hmm.
It is cool though because I remember playing that as a kid, and now I'm in control of the canon that fits in, and I can do things.
Yeah. Well,
So we did
speaking
an
of, yeah,
article on Edward Scott, and if you go to the very end,
I noticed.
you're welcome.
Oh, there was a very
For
bit
those
of a
of
dun dun dun
for
moment
those of
right
you
about
who
that.
yeah, for those of you who don't know, this article is called the DreamPod 9 community site, where we post development commentaries, character stats, vehicle stats for things that aren't in books.
Link will also be in the description below.
And we've done 4 named characters so far. Miranda Petit, who we've talked about the start. One new guy from Eden called the Black Knight, and then 2 of them, Edward Scott, protagonist of the first video game, and we call him the Shadow of Gamora, which is the unnamed pilot from the second video game.
Mm.
And in the Edward Scott article, at the very, very end, it mentions how Scott gets kind of back involved in combat because he killed his commanding officer.
There were exonerating circumstances at the time. The guy was a blues man.
Which is why he didn't get court-martialed, but we had him get drummed off into be like training and all of that.
Yeah.
Well, he comes back into combat as Earth invades again, and as he's flipping through regimental records because he gets assigned to the same regiment, to like do morale stuff because he's the duelist. He finds a report that he didn't get the memo on at the time because it was classified, that when they cracked open the Black Mamba at the end of the first video game, there wasn't a body in the cockpit. They
Which
never
means
confirmed.
somebody is still alive out there.
There is no confirmation that Brockton actually died.
Yeah. Ironically, I'm doing a run through MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries for MechWarrior Mondays, and I just recruited Jennifer Brockton. She's in there too. The name
Oh,
is
that's
apparently a year before Heavy Gear they came out. The video game came out. She was in MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries, just one of the mech jocks you can recruit.
Oh God,
She's
that'd be
dead
fun.
now, by the way, because a goddamn Whitworth shot at me through the level geometry. Goddamn you, 90s bugs.
Oh, MechWarrior
I'm not
2.
bitter.
It's a great game.
It's a great game.
game.
It's buggy as hell. And I can't even tell if this is a bug that's happening because the engine was buggy at the time, or is it because of all the black sorcery I've had to invoke to get the damn thing running on Windows 10?
I mean, it could be both.
It's probably both, because I've had this happen from 2 missions in a row.
It's probably both then.
Ugh.
But yeah, the other character we did is we took the character from the second video game, and yeah, he came back to Caprice and just said, "Screw you, I'm going native." Which well, that's a thing that happened when the U.S. was in Vietnam. Is that they dropped a bunch of Green Berets in, and a number of them just went
Didn't come
native
back.
and decided, "I'm not coming back, guys." So he's out running around with the two of the characters you meet. Yeah, but he's also running around specifically with two of the characters you meet in that video game. DePulciano and Pinter.
Yeah. One of the two you rescue from a prison camp.
Yep, that one, and then the one who joins you at the very, very start from Caprice.
Yeah, she had actually gotten through on a gate coffin through the one of the gates to actually warn Terra Nova of what was going on in Caprice.
We have pictures of, like, there's an art piece of that, and it's like, that's a little disturbing that somebody went through that.
Yeah.
But
those things are like the gate coffins in question. These tiny little ships that are barely, survivable.
It's called a coffin for a reason.
Yeah, just designed to stealth you through the gates so nobody can detect you as you go through them.
Yeah, no, it's cool kind of going back to deal with those, because a lot of people love those old video games. The second one holds up really, really well even now.
I would say the first one holds up really well.
The first one does too. Getting it working is the hard part.
Heavy Gear 1 and 2 repack editions. Look up Ultimate Heavy Gear Ultimate Repack.
I know. I know the guy who made those. One of the guys who worked on those, or at least is involved with that. He's the one writing the adventure modules for the RPG.
Nice. Well, that's some credo right there.
Yes, and side note with those adventure modules with the RPG, anybody who backs the RPG, there's you can get book and then book plus adventure modules and then physical copies of books. The 4 adventure modules we've got, 2 of them are purely historical. They tell events that have never been shown, quote unquote, on screen.
Yeah, St. Vincent's Maw
and Forged Alliance.
Forged Alliance.
Yeah. Just a note with that, Heavy Gear uses it wasn't really obvious at the start, but as time has gone on, Heavy Gear is actually kind of intended to use a movie film styling, which is why they're called seasons of campaigns. Things like that. In the RPG, we use movie terminology. You don't have a GM, you have a director. The characters are called actors, stuff like that. Anyway, the other 2, one was called Legends of Landships, and it's called the New Breed Director's Cut. DreamPod 9 actually came out with an RPG supplement related to the first video game.
And the second one as well.
And the second one. Kind of with the second one. It was the return to Cat's Eye, but they had to be around it because of licensing issues. They couldn't be directly that. That is done now. So those 2 adventures, we've got one called Legends of Landships, the other one called Sharpening Talons. You get to play through the first and second video game now.
Excellent.
You get to be a character, on the Vigilance in the first video game, and then you get to become a Talon member for the second one.
Yeah, because I think I remember from the first one, New Breed, you didn't actually. It was more like a prequel to the video game than going through the actual video game itself.
Yeah, it was set 2 cycles before the video game.
Yeah, so basically it retakes that campaign and then adds on the actual video game plus the connecting tissue, I imagine.
And then you can also play it in the video game from the South perspective too.
Ooh, okay, that is really cool. That was something I liked.
So all of these adventure modules can be played from either side.
Oh, that's good.
So St. Vincent's Maw is north versus south. You can play either side.
That is good. That was something I liked about the first video game, the whole Tour of Duty thing, where you could select either in the north or south for your starting position like that. That does bring to mind something regarding these modules and such. In terms of like their structure, how much are we dealing with more like, a linear series of missions and such like that, or more like a situational sandbox type module?
It depends on the module. So in the case of Forged Alliance and St. Vincent's Maw, you're provided with a very generalized goal to accomplish. In the case of St. Vincent's Maw, there's a crashed ship. It's got a bunch of medical supplies to go secure them. Forged Alliance, that one's a little bit more spoilery, but suffice it to say you have a general goal to work towards, and then the adventure just throws problems on the way.
Yeah.
The second 2, because they are, in the case of Legends of Landships, are recreating an old module and replaying through the first video game, and the second one is the second video game. They're a little bit more, I don't want to call them on rails, but you are
More
playing
adventure
through the
path
events.
kind of,
Yeah. It's more how are you going through it, and changes are going to happen on there. If your GM wants to go off the rails, it's totally cool. It's providing you support to go through the original video games.
Yeah. I'm assuming there's also going to be like, if your players decide to do this, here are some ideas of things to do and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then you've also got a number of them have, well, if you want to continue with this, here's a few places you could go.
All right.
So a little bit of both, bit of both on that front. The original Heavy Gear is also, the original Heavy Gear adventures were kind of a mix between the two. They had a few fixed like major event, major event, major event, and then you could kind of get to each one however you wanted.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense because you're dealing with, military operations. There's unless you're playing like, there's one of the reasons why in Battletech, for instance, mercenaries are so popular as a, conceit for players to do their thing, because then you can just go wherever the money is.
Yeah.
Whereas, actually, if you're working in the, national military of, for instance, the CNST or the AST, then of course, well, you go where they tell you to go, because otherwise you're gonna get your ass court-martialed.
Yeah, in the case of Legends of Landships, you're on the Vigilance or the Draco. They have their orders. You're going with them. They're going to court-martial if you don't.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to be a little bit more hand-holdy.
Yeah.
Whereas like
providing some proper motivations for, you have to already decide you have characters who are willing to go along with these missions, as opposed to having their own, independent desires and wants necessarily.
Yeah. And you can totally use these to segue into a later campaign. Like you can use these as a starting point, and then when it inevitably goes off of the rails, go with it.
Yeah. And it always inevitably goes off the rails.
Oh, it does.
These are RPGs.
Some of the beta campaigns we ran for this are absolute disaster, amazing, just off the rails train wrecks.
Tell me more.
I'll give you two. So these are two of my favorite moments. First one. This isn't so much a specific sequence of events. This is more of the game actually can handle this, because heavy gear, heavy milsim, giant robots. A lot of people are going to be running military-focused campaigns.
Yes.
One of our beta campaigns decided that they wanted to play. There's a company in universe called Weird But Tasty. Think McDonald's.
Yeah.
They played a team of food quality assurance experts going out to investigate a company using the logo, and like, have you ever seen like the Chinese ripoff brands for stuff? It's that with the food brand.
Yeah.
And they were sent off to investigate that. They got into one firefight the entire campaign. And they're running around as a bunch of food quality assurance experts. Their big climactic scene was infiltrating a restaurant trying to get samples because they didn't let you have a to-go bag.
Oh, God. I've heard of weirder concepts, but that was an Unknown Armies, so...
And that's fine. I just wanted to point that out, because that's one of the more... Wait, what? It is kind of cool, though, and it's something we like to point out with the RPG that, I mentioned Tom Clancy meets Votoms, or Tom Clancy, you mentioned the Votoms. Tom Clancy stuff isn't all gunfights. It's a lot of political drama. It's a lot of special operations. Sometimes you go an entire book without stuff getting shot at. That doesn't mean anything. Heavy Gear does work out that way. Like, the RPG is very, very capable of handling, I don't want to, like, go to war.
But
that being said,
why?
Hey, I am the writer. I'm not here to tell you how you should play your game.
Crime o'clock.
You want to talk about war crimes?
Yes.
So, this isn't war. Well, okay, this is 100% a war crime because it's a false flag attack. We had this has been canonized, by the way.
Oh, nice.
All of the things I'm about to tell you have been canonized, which is disturbing. One of the beta campaigns I ran in person with my local RPG group, they were playing a bunch of Black Talons trying to infiltrate a CEF occupied city in the south. They got in. They had one job. There is an Eden commander who is going to be about to take over this garrison. Get rid of him, because if you do, their Eden forces are very feudal in structure, so there's going to be a power vacuum. Resistance units get to do what they need to do. Well, the resistance, it comes out that the resistance is going to work with this guy. So they need to flip it and make a fake assassination on the guy. So they set up 2 snipers. They're going to try and fake assassination this guy. But to make it look real, they're going to do it at a changing of the guard ceremony as this guy's unit takes over from a CEF commander. So, like as he's going up to shake the CEF commander's hand, haha, photo op, they're going to try and fake the assassination shot right there. Beautiful, totally fine. One of the characters is playing a revisionist chaplain. Revisionism, for those who are familiar with Heavy Gear, is the main religion on the planet Terra Nova. It's a religion that the major sect teaches that it is the duty of the faithful to make the world a better place by violence if necessary. So it can be a little bit.
Yeah.
This guy was a chaplain from, excuse the barking dog, from the most religious nation on the planet, going to what amounts to like Las Vegas Sin City. Like from a character perspective, like this guy's just having a freak out the whole time. Also, the holy city that his religion's holy city also just got bombed flat by what amounts to a Battle of Stalingrad level situation. So he is not happy in general, and he's in like, this place is all full of like heathens and whatever. So they make him one of the assassins.
Oh God, he goes Charles Whitman, doesn't he?
Oh no, this gets way better than that.
Oh,
that implies competence.
Oh no.
So the guy, the player, is like, okay, well, I don't want to get ambushed from behind while I'm taking the shot. So he gets from the resistance like one of every heavy weapon they can, and he carts it up to a sniper's nest with a view of where this is going to happen. He's got a sniper rifle. All of the rest of it is lined up on tripwires at the door. Up to and including, and I made him tell me what he did. So he's got a pistol pointed at the door, an assault rifle, a crew-served machine gun, and a mortar. Just to be clear, he's in a 10x10 room.
He did not think this through, did he?
No, he did, because he realized the mortar was a bad idea, and then after rolling to set it up, had to roll to disarm his own mortar. Because he's on the radio, and they're like, you did what? How are you going to get out if there's a problem? Oh. So they go to this, the ceremony starts, and the 2 characters take their shots. One guy is supposed to shoot the Eden officer they're trying to fake assassinate. He doesn't get the most ideal roll, and he actually hits the officer, but not fatally.
Okay, well, that's probably the best, turn of events for that.
It does. The other guy is supposed to aim at the Earth officer and miss her. The character forgot. The player forgot that was his job. The character, we're saying, kind of finally snapped after being in what amounts to Sin City. Shoots her dead in the head, rolls the highest result possible, drops her like a sack of potatoes. This is where mistake number 2 comes in.
Oh no.
At no point before taking the shot did he do a security sweep of the apartment building. So he missed the patrol of Grells walking around the building, who then heard a shot come up from upstairs, and then over the radio, their commander's dead. So they go run up to the top floor, and within like 30 seconds of him taking the shot, he's got 4 of these. They're called Grells, which are the super soldiers.
Genetically recombinated
Expeditionary Legionnaires.
Expeditionary Legionnaries, yeah.
But it's 4 of the Mordred class ones, which are like
Eesh.
Olympic level, like Supermen. And they're trying to break the door down. He decides he's going to make a run for it through the only door that they're on. So he makes his bolt through the door. And remember those tripwires?
He didn't.
He didn't. Winged himself with his own machine gun. Fell face forward through the door, and then one of the Mordred just picked him up and snapped his neck.
Oh, dear. I mean, he died as he lived.
Mm-hmm. So a cool thing with that, and I mentioned like with, successful with failures, Heavy Gear as a system, one thing we did change was instead of just having pass-fail, it's pass-fail with a fail-forward mentality.
Mm.
So in the case of the guy who took the shot on the officer and accidentally hit him, he failed the roll. So it was still adjudicated a hit, but instead of, being the desirable hit, it actually hit the officer in somewhere significant.
How is that adjudicated mechanically? Like, when is it decided that
so there's a little chart,
pass, fail, or fail forward?
Little chart in the book that says, okay, if you equal or exceed the target of the roll, you're good to go. The GM can assign you a scaled up bonus depending on how much you succeed by. So we use the example of lock picking a door. You exactly get the number to lock pick the door. You've picked the door. Cool. If you beat the number by like 2, you get to pick the door and slip in for free. Nobody saw you. If you fail, the GM is allowed to still let you succeed, but with a downside. So let's maybe say you missed it by 1. Well, cool, you got in, but that was a loud noise.
Or the lock was scratched so much and it's pretty obvious someone picked it. Or the door, like you close the door but didn't close quite enough and it's like slightly ajar.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And there's a chart in the book that gives the GM like, okay, this much good to go, this much good to go with slight bonus, and then uses the lock picking example to walk through every single one of those.
This is something that's pretty important, I find. If you're going to go with narrative mechanics like these, like where the story progression is the goal, so to speak, you need to have these kinds of GM kind of guidelines and rules for these kinds of things, because otherwise you may have removed a bunch of rules and stuff like that with depth comes complexity. Let's face facts, when it comes to simulation, RPGs. But instead, you've put the burden on the GM to be adjudicating all these different situations where the player says, "Oh, I'm going to take this particular narrative aspect of my character and use it for a bonus in here," and it's like, okay, I gotta stop, I gotta check this out, as opposed to having the rules set already written out. Okay, this stat plus this stat, roll that, you're good to go.
Yep.
Which is the downside I find to the more narrative aspect, which I have to admit I'm a little bit iffy about, because I've played in those kinds of games where you've used those things and it turns into a shit show if you don't have the right kind of players for that.
Very much so. And that is something that with the book we provide a lot of examples. A lot of this is kind of how this would play out in multiple different situations.
These are how the rules are intended to be played.
Correct. So that one thing that we wanted to make sure is that if the players and the GMs read the same section, both of them expect it to play out the same way. Because that's the thing, is narrative isn't inherently the problem, it's inconsistency, I found. Where it's not that, well, the narrative system doesn't provide the structure, it's when the GM reads it and the player reads it and there's 2 different final results. That was our goal, is to ensure that there is one answer.
Yeah, like for instance, if we're going back to Mrs. Petite there and her aptitudes, like mission focused. So when I first looked at that, I'm like, okay, that is very vague. It covers a vast array of different possibilities, and under those circumstances, I can see a lot of GMs or directors, as they are referred to in the heavy gear system, being like, okay, that is just very generalized. I mean, how do I apply that? So yeah, having a lot of examples is definitely something that you're going to need.
Yeah, and there's a second part to that. When it comes to using those, the onus is on the player to put that in there, not the GM. It is not the GM's responsibility to figure out, well, how would Miranda's mission focus impact this? That's on the player when they role play it. The GM just have to say, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So that was part of what we did there, where it's on the player to leverage those aspects. What skills are they using? How are they using them? How are they using these quirks and adversities? To take that off the GM. So the GM's final result is to say, okay, there's another bonus with that, is when you have the player working all of that into their explanation, and you can do this fairly quickly. We found once you get going, kind of explain, here's what I want to do. That also gives the GM a lot of the information you need to then interpret the result. So we use an example in the book, and I'm going to pull it up real fast right here and read it out to you.
Okay.
Of explaining kind of how this role play is expected to work. Because in the core rule book, we call it a player's guide, but it's a player's kind of us breaking the fourth wall to the player. And then there's a GM one as well, where we kind of do the, okay, real talk. Here's what's supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
And in the case of the player's guide, we have an example where we talk about, okay, well, what can you do? Like, this is what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to use it. And it reads as follows. When the director calls for a skill test, you must lobby for what skill you will be using. There's no hard and fast rules for exactly what skills tests need exactly what skills. For example, if you are trying to pry information out of someone, you may have several ways to go about doing that. You could say you are going to use your interrogation techniques from your influence interrogation skill that you learned at, whatever you learned that, or investigation police interrogation. I'm a trained police officer. I'm trained in investigation. That's going to involve questioning suspects. That's a reasonable argument there. Or you could say that you're going to try and intimidate the information out of them by using the fact that you're an incredibly athletic weightlifter and you look like you could rip them out in half. It's how you describe it to the director. So here's a couple of ones we're going to try and I'll say this is this is the good version of that. There's a bunch of examples in here of scaling, really good, really good, really good, really bad.
Yeah.
So Leah uses her training and interrogation techniques from the Southern Republic to try and pry information from the bandit. She will use her callous quirk to impress upon the bandit that she has done this before and isn't going to hesitate at what's about to happen. That statement right there, okay, so we're using, it really should say what skill they're using. They're going to use their quirk called callous, and basically this person's going, resting bitch face, I'm going to explain to you in painful detail what's about to happen and why this is going to hurt really bad if you don't give me what I want.
Yeah. Without necessarily having to put on a funny accent and just,
correct,
doing like that.
It's still doing the role playing without you needing to act. It's conveying the information to the director to say, okay, this is the skill they're using. This is the quirk they're using. All you got to say is yes, no at that point, or if they're going to take a penalty, and then they're going to make their roll. And you've also got the context of what the player is trying to do and how they're doing it to then interpret the results. It's all right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing in the rules that we've tried very heavily to make sure is to understand with a player that this is what we're looking for to make the GM's life easier. Yeah. And if we get this, it's all right there.
Are there also examples of, a player coming up with an inappropriate concept like that wouldn't work and the GM shooting it down?
Yep.
Okay, well, that's good too. I find it's useful to know, okay, this is what you're not supposed to do. Just immediately get that out of the way, because what you can do is generally pretty, wide. But there are usually a couple of things that you probably should be avoiding that, because either.
Yeah, so we've got one in here about how, no, interpretive dance is not going to get this out of you because the guy loves your dance routine. Like, there's a line, and the skill domains kind of take care of that. The skill domain tells you what the skill is intended to be used for. Mm-hmm. And you can pretty well say for any action, here's the domain that's going to matter. If they're not using a skill that's in that, they'd better have a really good justification for why they're using it. And the director's allowed to say no. One of the other examples we use, and this is one of the ones that we put kind of on the edge, where it's like, this came from that same beta test campaign with the failed assassination.
Yeah.
We had a character or a group of characters, they were casing a protest, trying to collect information on the local resistance to hook up with them. And a car bomb went off and injured a bunch of people. Well, one guy's like, well, I'm going to go try and help people, try and patch up the injured and all that. He did the skill for this would be medicine. That's one of the domains we have. Medicine is the healing of things. That's the skill you would use. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, my character is a B-list movie actor. That was his pitch for the character. And I
I played a doctor on TV.
I played a doctor on TV.
Oh.
That is that, like, on the line. Depending on how far you want your group to go, this is the example you can point to them to and say yes or no.
Yeah, definitely no in my case.
I said yes. What you're allowed to do is, as the GM, if you say yes, there's a scaling penalty you can assign to it. So I said yes with maximum penalty.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a beta test campaign. The whole point was to do weird things and kind of break the system. But that's the example you can point to and say, that's the one where it's like, you can tell this is the line. Because I can get the argument. It's not that he played a doctor, it's that they actually brought a doctor in to explain doctor stuff to him because he was playing a doctor. Like, it wasn't that fact that he played a doctor in the script. It's the fact that they brought in an actual consultant.
He was on ER for a couple of seasons.
Yeah, he was on ER for a couple of seasons. Or to use another example with movies, how many military themed movies have the actors go through basic training or a little bit of it?
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but you might remember something.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, and the guy wasn't trying to do heart surgery. He was trying to bandage a leg.
Yeah.
Okay. this is that situation. And that's the thing, is the director just says at the start, look, kind of laid us out. We're giving you what our expectations. And yeah, ultimately, this is an RPG. There's a judgment call somewhere. You're going to have to draw a line somewhere. Some people choose to draw lines in very strange places, but you're going to have to make that line, establish it with the players. We provide basically all of the different levels of shenanigans, and you can point to one and say that's the line.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly the place that it should be at that point. Like I say, the biggest question really is the kind of examples that are given in order to guide the GM's judgment with regards to the system in question.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially for one that has this kind of more, I guess, I almost want to say loosey-goosey kind of aspect to the,
Yeah, so it's one of those things that it sounds really loosey-goosey when I'm explaining it. And then you go play it, and it's a lot more cut and dry when you're actually in practice. Like
that's
when
one
you're
of the things about RPGs, isn't it? You can read the books, but unless you're actually playing it, can get completely different results.
Yeah, I'll have to hunt it down, but we did a beta test campaign, or a beta test one-shot of one of the earlier versions, and you can see the system there, and it's not as much of a judgment call as you might think it is, because the extreme cases are far rarer than you think they are. Like that guy trying to heal because he played a doctor and says, that's the extreme.
Yeah.
That is genuinely the extreme.
And especially if you're having your characters all created as part of a single team, everybody's going to be, okay, we have characters, we have certain specializations, or especially
you
like
have an actual medic. Yeah, you have a medic.
Yeah. Like, you're not going to have a characters. You probably aren't going to have characters that don't fit into the particular team that you're creating, especially if it's one that's a military based or something like that.
Yeah, like I said, with that beta campaign, it's okay, that was actually alpha, where it's like the whole point was to make them push the system as much as possible, find the holes and do that.
Yeah,
and some of this stuff is like, okay, this can happen. Make changes around it as needed, which we did. In the case of that medic one, that doctor one, there were changes around that because of that one specific event. But we didn't totally get rid of the idea, because it's like, that's kind of the insane fun that you see in some RPGs. So we didn't want to completely disallow it, but it's not going to work out the same way it did that time. Like what that guy rolled at the time to do it wouldn't have even worked now. Like it's way worse. Like you are able to try. Don't expect to succeed in that situation.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I'm glad to hear, because a lot of RPGs don't go through practically any play testing, as far as I can tell. It's a rare amount that you actually go through. This RPG has been worked on for 2 to 3 years in its current form, and after 9 months, you already had play testing going. That's a lot of time spent play testing with.
Yeah, and it's been in person, it's been digital, it's been groups without devs, it's been groups with devs, it's been groups of devs. It's been people who've never played RPGs before. It's people who've played the war game before. It's people who've played other RPGs before. Like, we tried to hit all of that. And we did have a vision, and a lot of it has been, okay, making sure the vision works. And that was with the narrative stuff. Again, we wanted to make sure that when you play it out, it actually doesn't play out that dramatically different from second edition. It really, at least at the RPG level, the combat side has converted to the new Blitz system. That's a completely different situation now.
Yeah.
But that RPG, you sit down and you role play through a second edition game, the role play session parts of it play out almost exactly the same. The difference is, instead of putting the onus on the player to role play and then not having a mechanical impact behind it, we have made a mechanical impact behind that. I don't know how familiar, if anybody's ever played Dungeons and Dragons, how often do you see the lawful good paladin go rob somebody on the street?
If he does, he's not going to be a paladin for very long.
Assuming the GM's actually willing to do that. I've seen it happen where that happens, and okay, cool. Or then the player gets upset that they're no longer lawful good anymore. And you get this strange disconnect where it's like, you did that. Would your character have actually done that?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah. Almost as bad as the person who creates a chaotic neutral character to do whatever the hell they want. It's like, it's what my character would do.
Yeah,
I refer to that.
Dick. I refer to that as chaotic asshole.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't create a character, then you're playing a video game at that point in person. You're going through and you're playing the Fallout or the Skyrim, and then you're doing all the worst things possible, but then your character's doing exactly what they should in very specific situations. We wanted to make sure that at all times you are rewarded for role playing your character, to actually role play who they are as a person and how they would encounter and resolve each of these situations. So go back to Miranda. Miranda has specifically called out, here's the key aspects of her personality. Here's the good ones, here's the bad ones, here's the little iffy ones. Mechanically, they're doing the same thing that the old attributes did. They are adding or subtracting dice from your skill rolls. But they're doing it in a way that makes you, the player, actually roleplay the character without having to do a funny accent or whatever. You can play Miranda as this mission-focused, highly competitive, overconfident, basically hot-headed idiot that she kind of is. She's really a very... She's not inexperienced, but I'm trying to remember, the word is escaping me. But she's not inexperienced. She's competent with her abilities. She's very good at what she does. She's a highly competitive streak. She gets angry a little bit too easy. And she is completely tunnel visioned on that mission. That is now the character you are playing. And yeah, we lost attributes. Yeah. The fact that she used to have an agility of +3 doesn't mean she's adding 3 dice to very specific rolls anymore. You're still seeing the effect of that through the perks, through the collective quirks and adversities. Collectively, that system, you are still seeing the impact of that. It is not adding 3 dice to every roll in certain situations.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, at the start, I was a bit skeptical seeing those particular changes come to the Heavy Gear RPG. But I think, as you say, if it plays well and play about the same way in play versus how it's read, that is definitely a point in its favor in that regard. And this RPGs are one of those things where you can't necessarily judge the gameplay by the text as it is anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, we know it's a big change. It's something that it was a very incremental change for us as we went through this process. It's, in a way, we look back and don't see a difference because we were there every step of the way where slight change, slight change. You guys are seeing the beginning point and the end point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it looks really jarring. But I would encourage, like I said, I'll have to see if I can find the video. I also am working on a playthrough of the current version to have a group of that set up and actually run through it.
That will be actually very important, I think, to show people how it plays, how the rules affect
we're finalizing
gameplay.
some of the logistics on that. But again, like going through all the playthrough sessions and all that, it plays out a lot more consistently than you might think initially it does. Yeah. Like the stress points aren't the places a lot of people think it is when they first read it.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. Because that was one of the worries I had, but I think you've rather successfully addressed those today.
I mean, that's the hope. I mean, and the other thing is, I'm sitting here saying this and thinking we did it, and it will go out, and maybe it did, maybe it didn't. We'll find out. The beta test groups have generally seemed to be, because we've just hop in and watch them.
Yeah,
it's playing out the same every time we're watching a different beta group, which is a good sign.
Well, consistency is important in these kinds of things. Like, so something that this is one of the reasons why I prefer playing RPGs rules as written, which is something that's just heresy apparently to a lot of people. But
I know, right?
But it's like, okay, if I'm going from one game to another, I would like to actually know that when I'm playing the game, I'm playing by the same rules, so I know what to expect a little bit. I know that a lot for some reason the RPG hobby attracts DIYers to an insane degree, to the point where I've had to played in games where they'd never played the game before and had already started house ruling it, which is like, why did you even make your own game at that point?
One of my favorite examples of that is I've played. Most people played a decent amount of D&D. I always have to check: is this a DM who understands that the rules of roll a 20 don't mean you auto succeed and do whatever the hell you wanted to? Because that's not how that works. Go read the rules. That's not how that works.
No.
Because the number of times it's like, oh, well, my bard is going to try and charm the dragon. Oh, I rolled a 20. I get whatever I want. That is not how that works. And, we explicitly call that out in ours where it's like, yeah, congratulations, you passed your test. That does, you're bartering with a shopkeeper for a better price. You passed with the best possible roll. That doesn't mean you're going to get it for free. That doesn't mean you're getting 50% off.
You're getting the best possible price.
You're going to get
mean like, okay, you
might get 10%. Yeah, 10% off, or we'll roll the taxes in there.
Yeah.
It's like buying a car. It's like, yeah, the best price is we'll roll the taxes and the registration in there.
Or we'll throw in a new cup holder.
Or a new cup holder, yeah. Like, that's the kind of thing is we wrote the system and then tried to put in as many, like, okay, this is the boundaries of what this is going to do with examples. Like I said, we're working on a video that's I'm waiting to hear back from a few people on scheduling that hopefully should go up fairly soon. And it's all going to be live. It'll be live.
The only thing worse for scheduling for D&D games is scheduling for a video.
Yeah, I totally understand. But yeah, that's just the thing we've been trying to do is I can find the old one. The old one is a little bit flaky on the video quality, but the gist of it's there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important, especially these days, with all of the YouTube channels doing actual plays and stuff like that, and I don't mean like, getting a bunch of actors together and, doing, role playing. I mean, actual people playing the actual game, and it's boring as it might look to you see a bunch of guys rolling dice all for a couple of hours. But that really does, in this day and age, go to show exactly what the game is like at the table with real people playing the actual game, which I think really does help quite a bit.
I dropped a link in the chat if you get it, if you want to.
Yeah,
that's the video playthrough of a earlier draft. So it has been refined. There's more refinement that's happened. There's been some changes that have happened, but that was a playthrough from over a year ago at this point.
Okay, well, I'll definitely check that out. So yeah,
and it was also a group of players who've never played the system before. Most of them never even knew what the IP was before. So,
well, hopefully that'll change after this Kickstarter.
Here's hoping. But yeah, we're going to be doing another one with some more experienced players. At least when it comes to the IP. I think at least one of them was involved in one of the earlier betas that we're working with. So,
yeah. Sometimes it's always a good idea. Sometimes it's an idea to have a bunch of new players, but you have one person who's been in a couple of play tests to come in to kind of like guide things a little bit. If you want them to go in a particular direction, see how they see whether they take the bait in those kinds of ways. I find.
Okay. Yeah.
That's working.
But yeah, we're working on that, and as soon as we get a link, I'll share it with you. Like once we get an idea of this is where it's going and this is how we're going to present it or whatever.
Oh, thank you.
We're not sure. I'm trying to do an in-person one. But there's a backup stream option we're also looking at where we'll just stream TTS or something like that.
Yeah, it always works. There's a big like on Twitch and Twitch and YouTube, there's a big whole community of people that are doing like actual play game streams and stuff like that, so it fit right in.
Yeah.
Now, I have to ask this question, and I probably should have asked it earlier when we were still discussing the video games, but Heavy Gear Assault, what was that like coming from the DreamPod 9's perspective?
I am not allowed to talk about that.
Okay, enough said. Yeah, man, that was a shit show.
There's a lot of rumors online. I can neither confirm nor deny any of them, and I am not allowed to talk about any of that.
Oh, I understand, dude. NDAs are NDAs. I get that.
It's not just the NDA, but it also goes into like Heavy Gear has had, particularly in the last 10 years, well, I say 15 failed projects. This is the fourth attempt at a fourth edition of Heavy Gear.
Yikes.
Okay, the first one was by Steve Jackson Games. They got a little bit of the way in there and then just couldn't do it. The second one was another group of guys who were going to do it, and it didn't work out. And then the most recent version, I think that second one even like took people's money to join a beta test. Oof. We get comments from people. It's like, well, I paid 10 years ago to be in this beta test. I'm like, that wasn't us.
That was a different company.
It was. It had been farmed out. It was They were doing it by license through DreamPod 9. This is the actual in-house shot at it.
Yeah.
So, like we've had to deal with all of that. Like there was an attempt earlier with a company called Arkwright Press where it was a couple of the guys who were on the original, I don't say it was original, the very early Heavy Gear team, and they just couldn't finish it.
Oh
And
man, is
Heavy
there
Gear
anything?
Assault's kind of the same way.
Yeah, that one just went completely sideways in many ways from what I've been
Yeah.
able to gather from it.
Yeah, we
Oof.
had no involvement in it aside from licensing the IP.
Yeah.
Like
Is there any chance of the IP ever getting licensed again for another video game?
Yes, it's not off the table. Finding a publisher that will play ball with very specific requirements is not easy.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, here's an example. I'm not saying this is actually what's happening. I'm not saying there's any negotiations where this has
Of
come up,
course.
but this is a point that would have to happen. Whatever story they're going to tell has to be kosher within the universe, which means I have to sign off on it. A lot of companies are going to want total creative control, no involvement from the IP holder.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that's not how that's going to work. If you're gonna put our name on it, you know, from a story perspective, this is going to work within our universe.
Yeah. Because well, I mean, this is like, this is a situation like Mech Assault where you have like, on the Xbox where you have something that's completely out of canon and stuff like that
Yeah.
for that particular thing.
Well,
Here,
you mentioned the BattleTech video games. Like,
yeah.
almost none of the BattleTech video games even fit into canon.
Yeah, I think there's just one bit from the recent Harebrained Schemes BattleTech that actually has its own the Oregon Reach book, source book.
Yeah,
That's
but they
the
came out with
only
that
one.
after the fact.
Yeah,
Where it's
and
like,
that's the only one because
Mhm.
if I play a lot of the ones I played the most of were the MechWarrior 4 games because
Yeah.
A, it was my era, and two, they're about the only ones I can get running on my computer with the minimum of fuss and the minimum of bugs.
I
That's
still
everything
haven't
else.
figured out how to get mercenaries working on my Windows 10.
We'll talk
I
after this
played
interview. Might
so
be able to help you
much.
out with that.
Okay, I played so much mercenaries, but yeah, none of that fits in the BattleTech
Yeah.
canon.
Like, I mean, technically, the bad ending of MechWarrior 4 Vengeance is the canon one, technically, but even then, Ian Dressari isn't dead in canon, but the Black Knight Legion wasn't actually there at the time. It's like,
or you get like, what was it, MechWarrior 2, where you can play at the Solaris Arena, become the champion, but canonically, there's another guy who's already the champion for that year.
Yeah, well, basically, you have to assume that that's your character.
You have to.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a really weird assumption if that's the case.
But
yeah, that's the great thing about the original Heavy Gear video games is they fit within the canon.
Yeah,
if there's going to be another one, it's going to fit within the canon.
Yeah. Would you prefer it to be like in the style of the other two, it being a proper mech sim, or would you prefer another genre?
I've had three thoughts on what I would personally like to see. Number one, yeah, just another mech sim like Heavy Gear 2 is really good. I wish it would bring some of the aspects of Heavy Gear 1 back. There's some little things in there I quite liked. I liked Heavy Gear.
The customization thing where you could go into each individual component and manually change I love that part.
I loved that. And I also did like the more damage section BattleTech style damage system versus 2's. But 2 actually had a functioning mecha stealth system, which is cool.
Oh yeah. That's something I mentioned in the video, yeah.
And I would have loved to see a refinement on the squad command system from 2. So it's
2
like,
had
great.
some of the, in comparison to like even modern like MechWarrior 5, Heavy Gear 2 eats its lunch in terms of the command system.
Yeah, it's kind of disturbing how good that game still is. I would love a remaster.
The game puts little Christmas hats on your mechs when you're playing during the holidays.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that anymore?
Yeah, little things like that. Where's the fun in video games? I was watching a YouTube video.
That's the thing. The personality was what sold those games. You can make a super deep, complex, sim game, but if it doesn't have a little bit of personality, it's just a bunch of numbers.
Yeah. And I'd love to see something like that. They actually were working on a Heavy Gear 3.
I know, yeah. Savage Entertainment was working on that.
You can find concept art from Heavy Gear 3 out there.
Yeah, I have it on my computer and the hard drive.
Which is funny because I know the lore thing going forward that they were, it's funny because when it comes to a lore perspective, I know how the story, well, I don't want to say how the story ends. I know where the goal of everything going on right now is. and being able to look at multiple different development teams and look at Heavy Gear 3 and say, okay, I know where you're going. That's a very interesting way to get there. um, like some of the Heavy Gear 3 concept art's like, what?
Yeah, I've seen it too, and it was like, what am I looking at exactly here? This looks odd.
They were looking at doing like a gear that you could get out and fight outside the gear, like Titanfall.
Yes,
I'm sure
that
it's
was
like
something that would have been like, honestly, the intro cinematic for Heavy Gear in 1997 has that happening.
Yeah.
Literally, there's the Southern Gear taking aim at the Northern Gear that's attacking his base. The guy jumps out, uses his gear, it runs away, uses his gear as bait, and let the other ones come over the ridge and blast the guy.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing with gears is that they all have a minor AI. It's likened to like a smart dog.
Yeah,
so you can tell it to like stay, guard, do all these kinds of things. And as time has gone on, depending on the planet you're from, those AIs get more advanced. Like the Utopia ones, you can have full conversations with. In fact, their drones are a little bit psychotic.
Yeah, they're not full sapient AI, but they're like a really, 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 really good chatbot.
It's close enough.
Yeah.
It's close enough. And there may be some other ones in the future that are a little bit more closer to like almost like a Cortana from Halo. Anyway, back to video games. I would love to see a redo of like a Mech Warrior of a Heavy Gear 3 in the style of Heavy Gear 1 and 2. I would also accept like almost an XCOM styled game.
Yeah, like Hairbrained Screens BattleTech, turn-based strategy game.
Yeah, a turn-based strategy game. A little bit more like the XCOM reaction mechanics in there, where you've got this persistent group and you're trying to go do something. You're recruiting pilots, they're leveling up. I think that would be really cool. I would also do Dark and Terrible Things to let Blackhawk Studios, the guys who did Homeworld Deserts of Karak, do a Heavy Gear RTS like that.
Yeah, with the actual land ships and everything.
Yeah,
they've already done land ships. They just need to do some floating.
Exactly. It just needs. Well, they've even got floating ones in that game.
Yeah, and there's desert, so it's perfect.
Yeah, it's desert. It's got floating aircraft carriers, which has got swap out the little floaty tanks for little robots, and we're golden.
Yeah, there's actually a number of studios now that are doing like turn-based strategy mechs, turn-based strategy games with mechs of the same scale as Heavy Gear. Like there's Creekfront Tactics. I covered their demo rather recently. There's another one, Zeka Tactics, I think it's called.
Zeta Tactics, yep.
Yeah. And yeah, Zeka Tactics. That one's actually, I look at that and I'm like, oh, that looks familiar, that art style. It's like, incidentally, you are using the same kind of art style for Heavy Gear 4. In fact, paying for the art is one of the reasons you're doing the Kickstarter.
It's the primary reason we're doing the Kickstarter is like we got to cover the initial development cost, which isn't too much. But then like everything else we get is just art budget.
Yeah. And it's all hand-drawn, human-drawn art. I know that AI art is a bit of a kerfuffle these days. So
we are not, the boss has said, anybody who uses AI art, I'm not allowed to use as an artist. It has to have been drawn by a person.
Well, there you go.
But yeah, the couple of guys who got working have done a very good job of mimicking the old art style.
Yeah.
It's different.
Did the original art style. Yes.
Yeah, Ghislaine Barb did the original art style. We're bugging him for more art. We've been bugging him for 2 years for more art. So maybe we get him to come back and do some.
I hope so. Stuff is pretty much like his stuff is DreamPod 9's style. That is that particular aesthetic that he created is very much the house style for pretty much every game that they've come out with.
And the nice thing is the couple of guys we have doing art right now who are helping us, Osborne Yu and Eldon Cowger, both are doing a pretty decent job of coming close to it.
That's good.
You look at the cover, you look at the sample art we've got in that Kickstarter. That sample art's all done by one guy and it's all new. And that's, it's not 100%, but it's definitely in the style of the old Ghislaine stuff. So,
yeah. Well,
I've been very happy with them.
Yeah. When it comes to, at least, especially for the core book, you want a unified art style as much as possible. Yeah.
And Heavy Gear's kind of had some changing art styles over the years. We actually have a couple art books. You can flip through them. You can tell there's distinct stages of art, like transitions happen and things like that.
Yeah. Well, that's always the case for long-running series. I mean, look at comic books from the 1950s compared to now, and you will see a massive difference, obviously.
Or even just go look at the other Mech franchise. Go look at BattleTech.
Yeah.
Go look at a piece of BattleTech art from 20 years ago. Look at it now. It's completely different.
Yeah. I mean, now that they've brought back the unseen mechs too, now that Harmony Gold has been gotten off their back, you can
Oh,
look at the
Harmony Gold.
differences of the You look now at like the Marauder now and the Marauder then. It definitely no longer looks exactly like a Glaug officer pod, that's for sure, for certain. But you also look at like the reseen versions, the Project Phoenix versions, and like there's so many different versions of the art, and it still has that kind of distinct 80s sci-fi kind of feel to it in many ways, but just more advanced now.
Yeah, it looks a little bit more refined. It's presented a little bit better.
Yeah,
I'm loving the new stuff they've got going on.
Yeah,
I'm a giant robot enthusiast. What can I say?
Yeah. I mean, I've got the wands are there from Front Mission. That's just right there on my bookshelf there. So
it's out of frame, but over there I actually got the 6-pack for the Hell's Wall.
Oh, nice. That was a bit too rich for my blood, unfortunately. But
you know what I said? If I'm doing this, I'm doing the Hell's Wall. So I've got 6 of these.
I really need to play through that remake on Switch. Oh,
did you ever play the original one?
I've played. Well, I've played the.
Did you play the DS
version?
Okay.
I've tried playing the DS version. I mean, obviously, I have to do it through emulation because I have a hard ass time finding the damn things. But
yeah. The remaster isn't bad. The art style isn't my favorite.
I've heard some people say that. I kind of like the kind of mech diorama kind of feel to it.
Okay,
where it looks like little plastic figurines and stuff.
Yeah, the monsters are a little bit like torso heavy. And also, go look up a piece of art of the supply truck. It's a little disturbing. It's not a truck anymore.
Yeah, it's more like a weird kind of spider tread thing.
Yeah,
which kind of makes sense if you're going to bring a truck into kind of terrain that a monster.
It's allowed to climb, like it's allowed to climb in game, so like it doesn't completely not make sense. But I looked at it, and I'm like, man, that felt jarring. The other thing is, I've played the DS version. I have it on emulation, and it's just like there wasn't really anything extra added.
You don't need to emulate it anymore, and
no,
it's a nice coat of paint.
Yeah.
Plus,
I mean, I bought it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where sure you're buying the same game again, but it's a game from decades ago, and it hasn't had like 6 or 7 remasters of the a la Skyrim for every system under the sun. That
Yeah, like next week I'm buying the new Advance Wars one coming out on Switch.
There's also the Assault Suits Valken Declassified that recently released. I mean, that is that's a game that needs to be preserved ASAP. If they can do another for like Front Mission Gun Hazard, do a remaster of that would be awesome.
That'd be an interesting one too. Yeah,
I did a full review of that one a while back, and that one is Valken on steroids. It's like that, the same kind of gameplay done by the same kind of people, but not the same kind of people, the same people from the same team that did Valken, but it's a full-on action RPG at that point.
Yeah, I mean, some of those little Front Mission games are great. Like they really are.
Yeah.
I mean, I have emulation for 3 on my phone.
You're not the only one.
I'll just sit there, play 3. I have a Steam Deck, and I've got emulation for 4 and 5 on there. So
yeah. I think the main issue with Front Mission is that so many of those games weren't released at the side of the Atlantic with the localization. It's like if you wanted to know if you knew about Front Mission, chances are you only knew about 3, and Front Mission Evolved, and then Left Alive, and
we don't talk about Left Alive.
No, we do. It's jank as hell, but the art style is very cool.
Oh, it's great look. It's a
great looking game. It just plays. Whoever had the idea of making your character super, super weak and then having you replay the whole game multiple times in order to level them up should be flogged. A la Starship Troopers. Just brought to the center of the square. Clancy Brown comes in, give him something to bite down on, and then 5 lashes with a bullwhip.
Yeah, no, that just Left Alive was not something I was a huge fan of.
Yeah.
A lot of people weren't, though, so that's understandable.
Yeah, it's got some good ideas I would like to see revisited. The whole concept of a survival stealth action game in a war zone where you're not, big, you're not Solid Snake. You're the poor bastard that he tries to see. Normally he'd be, choking from behind,
Yeah, you're just a person on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like so many of those mecha franchises make you almost superhuman.
Mm,
And it's like that when you're out of the vehicle, having your character just be a person is kind of cool.
yeah. Plus, it really raises the it brings attention to the scale of the machines in question. Like if you're
Mhm.
standing next to a mech, it's one thing. If you're standing next to a hostile mech, all of a sudden you feel very small indeed.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
And you also get that sense of, yeah, it can't ever hit you with its weapons.
Yeah. Or
You
as
aren't
long as you're
going to
not, as long as you
survive.
keep moving and just you're not standing perfectly still for it to draw a bead on you. Yeah,
Mhm.
chances are you can actually avoid, because these things are designed to go after other vehicles, really.
Yeah.
Unless they're
But they're
packing
not they're
flamers,
not designed to hunt one person on the ground. But at the same time, if it catches you out in the open,
you're
you don't
fucked.
stand a chance. You don't stand a chance. And that is one of those realistic mech sims that I like.
Mhm.
I also like it when the mechs aren't the end all be all.
Oh
Front
yeah,
Mission is one of those franchises
yeah,
where a tank is scary,
yeah. And the same thing
usually.
goes for Heavy Gear, obviously.
Yeah.
And the thing that killed me in the first mission of Heavy Gear 2 the most was that goddamn hover tank.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, like it's a problem.
yeah. That's why I bring the heavy guided mortar on that mission pretty much every time. Just keep
Yeah.
my distance and beep, just
Hmm.
blow that shit up.
Yeah, that is one thing Heavy Gear does, and that's a cool thing we do with the combat system too, where it's like all of it plays within one scale.
Mhm.
I've played a lot of systems where it's like, okay, we're in vehicle combat. We have to use an entirely different combat system now to drive a vehicle. We don't do that. It is one
Good.
system. If you play, you can go from a fist fight to a motorcycle chase to a mech fight to a aerial dogfight and never have to stop and switch combat systems. It all
Thank you.
uses the same core engine.
That's good. That's something I appreciate.
Yeah, and it's something that like even the older version of Heavy Gear didn't do that 100% super well. Like
Mhm.
there was still some weirdness around like I'm an infantryman or you're in a tank. And one of the things that does is, yeah, you literally can't survive a direct hit from a tank shell. You are dead. Full stop. You are not
All
going to
right.
survive. That makes sense though.
Yeah.
Again, it's that realism aspect where it's like, yeah, don't get in an argument with the flamethrower tank over there. It is going to kill you.
Yeah. It has some very spicy arguments.
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, this brings to mind, we're going over that. Also, I would just have to say, if ever you wanted an idea for what to do for a Heavy Gear video game, having it done in the style of Valken or Front Mission Gun Hazard, like the side-scrolling running gun shooter, but with some weight to it and that kind of thing, that I would buy in a heartbeat. Just saying. Yeah.
I'm not the one who's in charge of that decision. So
Have your people I'll have my people call your people.
yeah.
Yeah. But speaking of other departments, I'm assuming you're not in charge of the other Dream Pod 9 franchises like Jovian Chronicles or
Nope.
Gear Krieg or anything like that. Is there any development on those? I know there's been some Kickstarters for the Jovian Wars miniatures,
So
but
Jovian
beyond that,
Wars is getting the third edition or the next edition of his miniatures is in development right now.
mhm.
The rules are totally free. You can go follow the beta right now. The guy who's working on it I like the take he's got on the presentation of it,
Mhm.
where it's like it's a lot cleaner and easier and helps deal with a lot of other issues. While still feeling like Jovian Wars. That should be shooting for release towards the end of this year.
Okay, good.
Because we've also got to do Mercury and Mars factions for new miniatures. So look for something for that towards the end of the year. Gear Krieg, there was a group that was going to try and bring it back, and I hadn't heard anything past an initial release of some 3D printed STLs for it.
Mm.
Past that, I haven't heard anything, which means nothing's probably happened. Tribe 8 was getting redone with some stuff. I think most, if not all of that's done. And then I think that's pretty much everybody.
Hmm.
And yeah. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm over Heavy Gear entirely. I'm over the RPG side of Heavy Gear, which also includes the narrative. There's a guy who does the war game side too that I work with.
Okay.
And it's like he makes the executive decisions on the war game side.
All right, makes sense.
Mhm.
Speaking of narrative, is there any plans for fiction to come out, like novels, short story collections, that kind of thing for Heavy Gear?
Nothing I'm allowed to talk about.
Ooh, okay.
It is an area that I would love to see things in.
Me too.
And I mean, when it comes to we have little short fiction in the RPG.
Yeah.
There's like 28 short stories in there. They're little 2-page vignettes.
Yeah. That's been a recurring thing throughout the history of this particular
Yeah.
RPG.
More than that, I would love to see more, and I really can't say anything else past that right now.
I will accept that.
Mhm.
New novels and short stories confirmed. Well,
Until something happens, nothing is confirmed.
nothing is confirmed until it's confirmed. Until then,
until it's in your hands. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
And
Well,
I'm even saying that as somebody who's internal, because it's like, there's plans, and then there's the things that come to reality.
yes.
We've had some people ask about virtual tabletop for heavy gear.
Yeah.
And the answer is we don't have that right now, because we originally were, and that fell through. And we weren't able to find somebody to fix that problem.
Yeah. I think a lot of people need to realize that, DreamPod 9 is a small company compared to like the behemoths of the RPG world, like, Wizards of the Coast and stuff.
Officially, there's 2 full-time employees.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's like me here.
There's Robert, the company president.
Mm.
He has somebody up there in Montreal who helps him cast. Myself, Rooster, and the guy doing Jovian Wars. We're all freelance officially.
Damn.
So I have a regular day job. Heavy Gear gets, depending on the time of the year and what's going on, anywhere between 25 and 5 hours a week of my attention.
Yep. I mean, that's always been the thing about the RPG industry. Barring a few very small examples, it's very much a cottage industry for the most part.
Mhm.
You have a whole bunch of people going in there as pure amateurs and independents. There are a couple of bigger studios out there, and beyond that, it's just a whole bunch of individuals just doing their own thing.
I mean, how many companies in the RPG space have more than 10 employees? Probably count them on both hands.
Yeah.
And that also goes to other things. Like, we've had some people ask with our Kickstarter, like, well, what about a GM screen? I don't see a GM screen. Like, okay, 2 things. Number one, I have to then spend 5 hours making a GM screen, which is fine if we thought it would be something that'd be worth it. We're probably going to do one, and it's free. The other issue is logistics. One of the things with our Kickstarter is it is very, very lean on things that would physically need to be shipped.
Yeah.
That's because who knows what shipping prices are going to be. We don't want to have to wait on a lot of this stuff, and we want to actually get it in people's hands.
We've recently gone through a very long period of time where shipping things was very, very precarious.
You're using that in the past tense. It is still there.
Yeah.
But
Well, at least there isn't a boat blocking a major canal this time.
That was funny. I still love the video of that one little bulldozer.
Oh, the littlest bulldozer that could.
But like a GM screen, okay. Who's going to print that? Is it going to be printed in North America? Is it going to be printed in China? Because it's probably going to get printed in China or overseas. Cool.
Yeah.
It now has to get on a boat over here. It has to go through customs. It has to go through shipping. And now all of a sudden we're waiting to ship books for 3 months while the GM screens arrive.
Yeah.
Like,
me and the wife have our own business here at home, and we do a lot of shipping overseas and stuff like that. And yeah, shipping is a big concern, not just in terms of time, but the amount of cost.
yeah.
And you can get it quickly, but that's going to balloon your operational costs versus having it done by boat or something like that.
Yeah.
You get what you have to. You either decide, do you want it fast or do you want it cheap? Because you're not getting both. Ever.
Yeah, you're not going to get both. And yeah, that's just the thing we did. So all of the RPG books we're going to get are actually going to ship directly from the printer in the US or their regional hub if they have one.
Yeah.
Just because there you go.
I think it's safe to assume, since DreamPod 9 is based in Canada, they have local printers as well for people like me.
So we're using DriveThruRPG, and they use a company called Lightning Source. I believe they have a Canadian hub. I don't know where it is.
Probably somewhere in Ontario.
I would assume. I don't know. But I think they do their shipping or whatever it is from wherever they do their shipping from. But that way, we're not waiting on them to ship stuff to Canada to then get shipped to the US or to the rest of the world or wherever. It's shipping directly to the customer, which is going to save money because that's one shipping charge, not two.
Yeah.
It's going to take half the time because it's one shipment, not two. And the other thing is, because it's one shipment, we're less likely to have damage in the way. Like, you don't want to get a giant book and it has a giant cut in it or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And if it gets shipped twice, that's more likely to happen.
Yeah, the more hands that a package has to go through, the more chances of something going wrong.
Yeah, and we don't want that to happen. So minimize shipping costs, minimize potential damage, minimize time. Yeah, we kept our rewards lean. Like when we were setting this up, the boss is like, we are not going to do any add-on that requires DreamPod 9 to ship something.
Yeah. Not to mention there's so many Kickstarters that have gone completely haywire just because the person put all these add-ons into things and then couldn't follow through for one reason or another.
Would one start with a R and end in Robotech?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, that's not a bitter pill for some people still. But yeah, where you look at it and go, it's like, yeah, we don't want to over promise on this stuff. The other thing about it is, it still needs to be the point of the Kickstarter is to raise money to actually pay for this stuff. I was looking at like the BattleTech Kickstarter recently. They're up to like 5.5-6 million US or something ridiculous at this point. And if you look at it, it's not really that much of a money savings aside from you get a free basically copy of the core game. But that's because a lot of their costs are done. A lot of the stuff's probably already in production. It's almost a pre-order. I don't want to like say it is, but
well, there's a lot of companies that basically use Kickstarter as a pre-order machine.
Yeah, like I'm looking at it for what I want, what I would want out of that, and just saying it's not worth it to me to do it because I actually would save money going through my local shop because they cut 10% off any miniature you order. And it's like, for what I want, I'm going to save money by not going through the Kickstarter. And I think part of that is because, they've already got a lot of molds made. They've got, when they showed this, they had pictures of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas we're trying to actually cover the development costs and get stuff done. So when we're putting add-ons in there,
you're adding on to costs for yourself.
Yeah. So like we had some people ask, it's like, well, can we get an add-on to get the adventure modules as a print on demand? And I'm like, we can't do that because if we did, we'd have to charge you what that was. Plus more because we need to actually get money to make the book. If we just charge what the add-on's worth, that money goes immediately to the printing and it's nothing for us in the actual Kickstarter. We get it, but then it's all already spent on the add-on.
Yeah.
Like we need something there to get the rest of what we want. And at that point, as a customer, just buy it yourself. Like these are going to be drive-through RPG products. They're going to be set up for it. You can order a print-on-demand copy for the price we would have charged you for it or less.
Yeah,
I'm just going to be completely honest. That's what it is. So yeah, we kept a lot of our shipping to a minimum. We kept a lot of our physical rewards to a minimum.
Yeah. Well,
it is what it is.
Yeah, you don't want to overburden yourself in these kinds of things because, who knows what's going to be happening by the time this stuff's ready to ship.
Yeah. The other thing is the last Kickstarter DreamPod 9 ran was 2 years late in shipment.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to repeat of that.
Yeah, we don't. It was a combination of waiting on molds. The book needs to be laid out so it can go to print. That was not done when that Kickstarter happened because they were going to do it while they were waiting for the molds. Well, eventually those two problems got decoupled and the models shipped, but the rules hadn't yet.
Oof.
So, that finally happened. Whereas with the RPG, the boss is like, we are not going to Kickstarter unless that book is actually printable right now. I could go in right now, drop in existing art assets, send it off to drive-through RPG, and have a print copy here next week.
Yeah.
That is where it is.
That, I think, has always been the more responsible way of doing a Kickstarter. You have something that you already are ready to go. You just need to, pay for certain amounts of extra things that come with it, certain costs and stuff like that. But you have something that you're selling. You're not just selling a pipe dream that you're going to work on as you're going along. You have like either a working prototype in the case of a video game or something like that, or you have, a book that's pretty much ready to go, just needs extra art assets, maybe another line pass or two of editing, stuff like that. That is really, I think, one of the more responsible ways of doing this kind of, if not, I wouldn't call it pre-order, but well, even if you're doing like a pre-order and early access thing, you want something that people are going to put their money down on that's actually worth their money, even at that early period.
Yeah, it's that great trade-off because that development time costs money. So you get this weird trade-off of like, well, if I wait long enough till I have a product, people will like it more and it will ship faster, but then I've already paid for everything.
Yeah. That was the problem that happened with Heavy Gear too. They spent they got delayed so long that by the time they actually had to finally release it, they didn't make enough money to pay for the whole thing.
Yeah, which is sad.
Yeah, I know. Well, hopefully that is not going to be the problem with Heavy Gear 4th edition.
It shouldn't be.
No,
like I said,
mean, you've already paid past the initial goal for the Kickstarter already in the first day, so that's already a good sign.
Yeah, so what that means is we're going. This book's going to happen. In about 2 weeks, I'm going to start issuing art orders. And those will be due back by like end of July, mid-August. Drop them in the book as I get them. Start of September, request a print copy. Assuming it's all good, we're ordering print copies in October.
Yeah. So in terms of like the current, well, you've gotten to the initial backing goal. What other rewards are there currently? What's the next one down the list?
So the next one going down the list is at 50,000 Canadian. Excuse the light glare as I fire up my own copy here. 50,000 CAD is going to get us it is a intro adventure. So it's an introduction adventure. We call it Tempest Winds. So anybody, and this goes to all backers. So anybody who backs us, you're going to get this add-on for free.
Nice.
It's a learn to play tutorial of the game. So it's kind of a guided adventure that will take you through the main points of the game and kind of walk you through everything.
Always useful.
Yep, you get your guided tutorial, which is beautiful and fantastic. Once we're past that, every additional 10,000 we get is going to be unlocking more adventures that are just going to get added into anybody who pledged at the adventure levels.
Okay.
So if you're already backing, you aren't going to have to shell out any more money for now. Okay. We get long run numbers. We can talk about there's some stuff that would be add-on stuff.
Yeah.
But for everything we've got plotted out, those first 3 stretch goals, which will take us up to 70,000 Canadian, that's going to get us everything. It's going to get us mostly new art, but you're also going to end up with 7 adventure modules versus 4.
Nice.
Each of those adventures, the main 6 average 80 plus pages each, and then the learner one is like 60. So 6 books at 80 pages each is another RPG core book sized pile of content. Toss on the adventure modules, and for $60 you're getting 1,000 pages of content.
Okay, that's pretty impressive. Well, on that
note, all digital, but hey,
yeah, it's all digital, of course. But yeah, well, I'm certainly hoping that you get a decent amount to be able to get to that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean and the thing is, like, a lot of this stuff is pretty far along production level. We're looking at art assets. The stretch goals are a little bit like those 3 stretch goals. They have a little bit more work to do, but that's why they're stretch goals.
Exactly.
Because we need to throw more money at them to solve that problem. Like the 4 adventure modules that we are shipping with, those are done. Like they just need some art assets dropped in them. That's it. And some of those art assets, we've got the add-on for canon characters that we let people do. And we've sold through like almost half of those already.
Well, never underestimate the importance of allowing the internet to include their own little custom waifus into whatever product you're making.
I mean, we're not too concerned about it on our end. Like I said, when we set it up, I have veto power over any name setup or whatever. So
yeah.
The other thing is we're not when it comes to how they're going to work, they're going to show up in an art piece. We're making that promise. It may not be an art piece in the core book.
And
It
they
may be a
may be
future one.
dying at the time.
They may be dying. We will also, their name will be canonized and either put on like a caption of the picture. They might show up in a short story or whatever. And again, they may be getting brutally murdered in the process, but that is all possible. The other thing we did is we allowed you to pick, when we do it, you get to pick their name, you get to pick their appearance, which basically means send us a reference picture so that we can pan to the artist.
Yeah.
And like maybe a quick description of any changes. And then also what colony they're coming from or nation they're coming from. So if you want to do a character from Atlantis, I'm not going to stop you. It may take a while for us to get them in a book.
That's true, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, anybody on Terra Nova, Caprice, Eden's, Earth, or Utopia would all be fine. Like that'd be a fairly easy slot.
Yeah, they're part of the initial invasion force and the place getting invaded. So
yeah, like that'd be easy to do. New Jerusalem may be something that may not be super hard in the future. Just saying.
Looking forward to seeing that.
Oh man, we went a very different direction with them than the stereotypical sci-fi religious faction. They are not what you're used to seeing.
Oh, that should be interesting.
We tell people like, you expect those like, almost crusader style vibes from them of, they're out to go strike down the non-believers. It is not that. It is something very, very different.
Well, one thing that the Heavy Gear setting has always been very good at is creating cultures and, polities that have their own feel to them that remind you of other things in many ways, but they have their own perspectives on stuff. Like, the AST, the larger Southern League is, mostly controlled by the Southern Republic and its vassal states, at least at the time during the previous editions. I know
which is still true.
Problems, which is still true, but they're having some issues as of late.
No, it's all fine.
It's all fine. But the idea of having a very politically totalitarian state with a far more socially progressive attitude is one that's, you don't see that often, ultimately.
Versus not a lot in fiction, no.
Yeah. Versus, the northern states, city states, which, as you say, the religion of the Terra Nova is very, very strong in the north. So they are far more, socially conservative, but ultimately far more politically liberal in many ways. So you have that interesting contrast in that regard that you don't necessarily see. Plus, the individual states like the Humanist Alliance, which is like Plato's Republic, gone horribly right or wrong, depending on how you'll look at it.
Yeah, like that's the crazy thing with all of them is we tell people like from a thematic standpoint that all of them are like somebody's take on utopia. Like ask the average person what their ideal government, nation, whatever would look like, and that's probably in Heavy Gear somewhere. We just take it to the okay, and then it went wrong part. Like where is this going to break down?
Yeah, there's no particular good guy faction that is entirely black or white. Even the New Earth kind of NEC. I always forget the C. New Earth
Concordat.
New Earth Concordat. Thank you very much. They're a bunch of fascist bastards, but they have damn good reasons for being fascist bastards. Their planet's dying. They need the resources from the colonies they're taking back, or humanity there is dead. Yeah, so like it's what do everybody's got a reason. What would justify the kind of horrors that they're visiting on everybody, if not the existential dread of that?
Yeah, everybody's got a reason for the way they are, and sometimes the reasons are a little weird, but we try to keep that, and then also like investigate the political aspects of that. You mentioned the Humanist Alliance. There is more development in the Humanist Alliance political structure than there is in the political structures of many other IPs combined.
Yeah.
Like, it's that level of detail where it's like, because usually when you see one, like a political power in a nation, it's in some fictional nation, it's here's the main guy, here's the opposition. Okay, that's it. Like, not with Heavy Gear. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, it's very much like you said. Tom Clancy meets Votoms. As you said, the Tom Clancy's a lot of political shenanigans happening.
Yeah,
and especially if you're going to have, as you mentioned, for the adventures, having both sides being playable, you have to have not just both sides having a reason to fight the other, but you have to have a reason for the player to want to fight for either side.
Oh
So there
yeah,
has to be some good to them. Otherwise, a player is just going to be completely repelled by them.
yeah, and that's the thing is every faction has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. One of my favorite factions in Heavy Gear is the United Mercantile Federation.
Mhm.
And for any viewer who's not watching this, has no idea what that is. It is a nation that is run by businesses. Like it is the ultimate. The government's entire existence is basically managing infrastructure contracts. That's it. That's
Yeah.
all it does. Their military is a corporation with a board of directors that is concerned about profit margins, all of it.
They're
The
basically a
military.
PMC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's mentioned in Universe that like they do advent calendars every year with some of their more photogenic soldiers to raise money. They run tours of military bases and they charge you for it. They sell little model kits and memorabilia and all that. If you want to do a movie that involves Northern armies, the UMF will like rent you soldiers to be extras with the actual vehicles.
Oh boy. Yeah.
But that society also has massive issues with like what happens if you're unemployed and homeless.
Yeah. That does tend to be a problem when your government is run by corporate types.
Yeah, so like essentially it's illegal to be homeless in the UMF where if you're homeless they're going to give you the shittiest lodging and you're going to work for your existence and it's almost like a prison sentence. And all of every nation, every power is like that where it's like, yeah, there's things that people would see as a redeeming factor, but then there's also the dark side. And some of it gets really messed up.
Yeah, I
Like the
imagine.
one of them is the Western Frontier Protectorate. If you're familiar with the first Heavy Gear video game, the one guy, the one squad member who lives who hates you through most of it, he's from that.
Yeah.
Um, the reason his name is what it is because they flip their first name and last name, so
Yeah,
it's
I
usually
was
last
always
name
wondering
first.
about that. Yeah, that makes sense now.
Yeah, because they're like Scottish Mexican thing, like they have a Hispanic flair to them, but they're like Scottish cowboys. And they have a very clan-like society where it's like families and extended families, so much so that they actually put their last name before their first name.
Yeah.
So the
Reeves
guy
is
is
the character in
that's
this fiction.
that's his last name
Yeah.
though, but it's the first name he would write on a piece of paper.
Mhm.
His actual normal name is Ethan.
Yeah.
But it's Reeves Ethan is the name it would be presented as. But they're basically they're the Federation from Starship Troopers. Their situation is they've been basically run over militarily so many times that they are their own military nation state
Nice.
where you join the military and if you complete a tour of duty in the military you're a citizen and only citizens get to vote and hold office. And it's 5 years in their military, 10 years in an allied military, or 20 years in anybody else's military.
So even if you were part of an enemy and you decided to eventually, okay, after a little bit of a moment of peace, to emigrate, if you had 20 years in the army of the Southern
You
Army
could
and just
you
like
could apply for
apply for
citizenship in the
citizenship,
UMF. Mm-hmm.
oh, that's nice of them.
I mean, it's 20 years of your life, basically. Well, in Heavy Gear terms, that'd be about 14 years of actual time.
Yeah, semantics at this point. It's like, okay, yeah, you've been fighting us for that long. Welcome aboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you may not get any votes for office, but hey, you'll be a citizen.
Yeah.
And they're all like that. And then you go into the downside of that, where they have so many like interclan politics that clans sponsor military units, and those military units don't like each other.
Yeah. And then you get the problem of like Port Arthur, the new coalition, and the Grells that were left behind from the initial CEF invasion, who've now
What
gone native
problem?
themselves,
What
or have
problem
become
with
part of
that?
a Grell supremacist movement, or all the rest of that.
Yeah, they're still out there.
Yeah. Um,
They're still out there, and they may have things to do in the future that are going to be a little wait. What?
yeah. Oh, you mean like you mean they have more antimatter bombs to detonate on to get the Black Towns
No,
pissed off?
no, they don't.
Good for them. You remember what happened the last time they pulled that stunt.
it, it's gonna be weird.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing. That's one of the
We
things. Heavy Gear has got one of those settings that I do always like to see what comes next in it.
the Grell situation just in general. The core RPG book is about kind of setting the stage for us to continue the story.
Mhm.
When we start getting to the expansion books, we get to continue the story, and we kind of pour gas on the Grell fire and it goes a really strange place.
Yeah. Well, they're already going to be pretty pissed about the flail situation. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
that's not a problem already.
Yeah.
And
For
that's
those who
also
don't know, the CEF decided, okay, our super soldiers are kind of a bit wonky at this point from being in the field so long. Let's carve them up, take their brains and a couple of their internal organs, stick them in cybernetic, chassis, and then send them back into the field.
yeah.
Yeah, that's going to
Mhm.
make people real happy with you.
Yeah. And that's also not even counting sledges.
Oh yeah,
So there's
haven't
a,
seen
a
those in a little
third
while.
there's a third class of Grell, and yeah, sledges are still a thing.
Nice.
So it's like, what's going on with them?
Yeah, what have they been up to?
We use them to kind of explain away a few things.
Okay. Well, it's always good. Because you obviously, after so much time, there's always going to be little niggles and retcons that have to happen in terms of
There,
the ongoing
there's a
narrative.
few retcons that had to happen. The sledge one isn't a retcon; it's more just
Where are they now?
the storyline left off here, but we're up here.
Yeah. So now we get just kind of like fill in the blanks, see where.
Yeah,
Happened.
like what happened in the intervening 20 years. Like with sledges, the idea with a sledge is they look completely human.
Yeah, unlike the Grells, which you can look at them, you can tell, okay, that thing's
Mhm.
had a genes tampered with quite a bit.
But what's very interesting is you actually can make a sledge look like a Grell.
Oh.
So what we did in Universe is to kind of bring Grell forward. Is that the CEF stopped production of traditional Grells in 1933. That's a plot point. Where are all these Grells coming from then? So what we're actually saying is the new generations of Grells that are invading Terra Nova are actually sledges. Like it's a wetware upgrade effectively at that point, where it's like, okay, so they're more independent, they're more capable of independent thought, and they're less the drone soldiers you've seen before.
Yeah, better
So that
fighters, but potentially a bit more
independent.
potential to go off the reservation a bit.
And it also lets you, as an RPG player, you can play a Grell in the RPG. It lets you play a CEF Grell without playing a drone, basically. Like you can have a character be a Grell and be a character still now.
Yeah, because the original Grell models were very single-minded in their focus.
Yeah.
It would be very hard to play them as a full, well-rounded
as an RPG character. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just to note that humanoid sledges still exist. Those aren't gone.
Yeah. Well, they make really good infiltration units. Let's face
yeah, which makes you wonder who you get this like who's a sledge, who's not a sledge situation going
who's
on.
a skin job around here.
Yeah, who's a skin job, or which one's the replicant?
Yeah, which is essentially what Grells are in many ways, as sledges as well. So
yeah,
you got that
they're
whole aspect.
a classic clone, basically.
Yeah,
yeah,
which is what replicants for Blade Runner were. Also.
Yeah, makes you wonder what the original ones were. Like if a
Or
Grell is a
who they
clone,
were.
if a Grell
Who
is
the
a
clones were.
clone, what was the original one?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question to leave off on because I'd probably have to go get some dinner myself here. But this has been we just spent 2 hours talking heavy gear. This is awesome.
Glad to be here. Hopefully answered a few questions on like what we're doing with the RPG, because I've had a lot of people ask where'd the numbers go.
Yeah.
And where we're going.
I mean, we've seen RPGs have undergo massive system changes. Like, D&D had everything from AD&D to 3rd edition, then 4th edition. And we all remember how well received 4th edition was.
Yeah, we're trying not to be that.
Yeah, most people try not to be that, except if you're Wizard of the Coast, in which case you try to repeat the past, you blundering idiots.
But yeah, I have opinions on D&D. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, be on the lookout for the next couple of weeks. We should have a video going live of a playthrough, either live or up on a YouTube channel. I'd encourage you to give it a watch. You might be surprised just how much it plays out exactly like what you're used to.
Yeah, well, that's not something to look into. And of course, to keep looking into on the Kickstarter, the link is going to be in the description. Also, the DreamPod 9 community blog that you've been adding so much stuff into as well.
So much stuff.
Well, Nick, this has been great. Thank you for coming here and talking.
Thanks for having me.
Oh well, it's been my pleasure. I've been a fan of the heavy gear setting ever since those first video games. That was my first entry into the whole thing. So it's nice to see these things coming back to the forefront. And if you ever do decide to come up with a new video game, I'm definitely gonna be playing that too as well.
Oh, I will be playing a lot of it too.
Yeah. And if you ever manage to get whoever owns the rights to those two video games, to get their heads out of their ass and actually, remaster those or put them back up for sale somehow,
It's Activision. Good luck.
Well, Microsoft is buying Activision, so we'll hopefully
I'm
be able
aware.
to talk to them or something, and maybe they'd be a bit more open to it. Who knows? Rights holders.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's at least it's not as bad a situation as the MechWarrior games.
Yeah. Hey, we're allowed to use the storyline and the characters from it, so
There you go. I mean,
I can work with this.
I'm so can I. Well, thank you, Nick. This has been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
All right. To everybody else, I've been Zero Sum. This has been Nick, line director for Heavy Gear over DreamPod 9. The Kickstarter for the 4th edition of the Heavy Gear RPG is currently ongoing. Go check that out if you want to. Till next time, we're both ejecting. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
All primary objectives complete. Mission successful.